and it's particularly important and apt given the subject matter of today's agenda. Before I get into the specifics of the agenda, I want to take a moment to acknowledge an appointment and reappointment to the board. Thanks to the action of Senate President Pro Tem Tony Atkins, I'm thrilled to welcome our newest board member, Henry Perea Sr. Henry is well familiar with this project, a former supervisor in Fresno County, and a very welcome addition. So welcome, Henry. And we look forward to a more formal swearing in ceremoniously when we are in your town. So thank you, and delighted that you could join us.
Thank you.
I also want to re-acknowledge the appointment and reappointment of our colleague Ernie Camacho to the board. Ernie, congratulations on your reappointment. Sure. I really look forward to continued work together on this important project, and thank you for all your hard work for us.
Thank you.
Okay, let's get into the meat of today's agenda. There are 3 action items before the board today that will enable us to further the development of the statewide Phase 1 system from San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Anaheim. As this board did for the Southern California routes in the fall of 2018, today we are asked to concur on the staff recommendations for the preferred alternatives to the Northern California routes for the Merced to San Jose and the San Jose to San Francisco segments for identification in the public draft environmental documents that are upcoming. Concurrence of these alternatives is an important step in the environmental review process because it indicates to the public and to our partners our preliminary preferences after initial analysis of various alternatives. Equally, if not more importantly, it ensures that we as board members can hear directly from the public and critical stakeholders about the potential environmental, community, and other issues with the potential alignments, including our preferred alternatives. With that important input, we can ensure our staff pay particular attention to those issues that are of concern to the public as they develop the draft environmental document. Hearing from the public last fall in Southern California in a similar circumstance was very informative and helpful to the board and to staff, and we look forward to what I'm sure will be extensive public comment today. Importantly, concurrence on the identification of the preferred alternatives to include in the environmental documents is not the end of the environmental process. Far from it. Analysis on all the alternatives will continue. Public input on the draft environmental document will continue to be afforded and considered, greatly facilitated by the public knowing which alternative is the preferred alternative for our proposed project. Work to mitigate the impacts from the project will continue to be developed. A draft EIR/EIS is scheduled to be made publicly available in 2020 and will provide ample opportunity for further public comment over the course of the coming year. I anticipate staff will bring back to this board a final EIR/EIS for our consideration in the first quarter of 2021 and associated actual approval decisions of one of the alternatives. The other action item on the board today, before the board today, is a request to delegate authority to the CEO to further streamline our environmental approval process in light of NEPA assignment having been granted to this project. We'll have a presentation on this item from our environmental and legal staff. Okay, want to describe how we're going to go through the agenda today just to facilitate as much public comment as we can. In order to make that work, I want to leave plenty of time for public comment and discussions of the preferred alternatives. Therefore, we're going to take up agenda items 1, 2, 5, 6, and 7 first before going to items 3 and 4, the preferred alternatives. Okay? We'll have a staff presentation on each of the recommended preferred alternatives when you go to agenda item 3 and 4, followed by public comment. So we're moving those items to the latter part of the agenda so we can have the full time for public comment. At the conclusion of the public comment, we will consider the question of concurrence with the staff recommendations for both state and federal environmental review purposes. In other words, we're going to vote on the resolution for CEQA purposes and another vote on the resolution for NEPA purposes after the public comment on items 3 and 4. Again, we will have opportunity for public comment on the preferred alternatives as we consider them in that order on the agenda. If you have a comment on any other agenda item, and if you haven't already turned in a comment card, please do so because we will be beginning with that. Okay? Is that clear? Okay. And as well, this is the time now before we go for any other public comment on non-agenda items. And we have a large number of public comments, which I will work through and ask that you each try and limit your time period to get to the specific points that you'd like to raise. And I want to start the public comment period by welcoming San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo to address the board. Mayor Liccardo?
You hear me now? Okay. I can use my Sicilian voice.
In the heart of Silicon Valley, it takes us a little while to get the technology to work.
Yeah, it says it's on.
I take it no one's speaking, Lenny?
We're trying to get the microphone set up. We've just 1 minute here.
Can everyone hear me now?
No.
Can anyone hear me now?
Try it now.
Hi. Hello?
I don't know what happened here. Do you think maybe because the lens on the camera should make a difference?
You can come on and use this one.
Their mic's working.
You're welcome to use this one if you like.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. What happened?
You able to hear me now? Nope. I'll keep talking.
Okay.
Fishing, I'm happy to keep talking.
No,
It may have something to do with having Lynn piped in on the telephone.
Because we can hear. That sounds like a mic.
How's that?
we know you have a very powerful voice, Mayor Liccardo. We want to make sure everyone could hear it, so thank you for the...
Thank you,
There we
Chairman
go.
Donza. Thank you so much to everyone for your participation here in San Jose and in Santa Clara County. Welcome to San Jose on behalf of our 1.1 million residents. You managed to arrive in the Bay Area the same day as our president, and I look forward to hearing from him later today, undoubtedly praising your progress in building the nation's first high-speed rail system. Thank you for allowing me to address you today. And more importantly, thanks to each of you for your leadership and your steadfast efforts to make the vision of high-speed rail come to fruition for the future of California. Thanks particularly to high-speed rail staff, especially Brian Kelly and Boris Lipkin, for collaboratively working with the city and the community through the high-speed rail EIR and the Diridon Integrated Station Concept Plan process. First, please know that you have strong regional support here to build this system all the way to Northern California's largest city, San Jose. At our central station in downtown San Jose, high-speed rail will connect to robust regional systems, BART, ACE, Capital Corridor, Caltrain, and Amtrak to provide a platform-to-platform connection for high-speed rail passengers to every sizable city in Northern California. Within a stone's throw of that Diridon station, we're seeing the doubling of the Adobe World Headquarters, 6.5 million square feet of Google campus, millions more square feet of other offices, and many thousands of very high-density residential units planned or under construction. And while we certainly acknowledge the fiscal realities of building within your budget, I hope you will agree that the $20 billion you're about to spend constructing a high-speed rail system in the Central Valley needs a connection to the extraordinary opportunity here in Silicon Valley to be truly worth that $20 billion. We look forward to working with you to identify the funding needed to connect millions of residents to the tremendous job opportunities of Silicon Valley and to connect our valley with the affordable housing opportunities in Central Valley. Now, I understand, of course, today the board will be identifying the preferred alternative, the high-speed rail alignment for the San Jose segment, the draft EIR. The San Jose to Merced segment, excuse me. Over the past 3 years, we have communicated with the high-speed rail staff regarding concerns around alignment and potential impacts to our community. And when the city developed a city-generated high-speed rail, a city-generated option high-speed rail, the authority staff responded that certainly it understood and embraced the vision that the city had, but the vision was beyond the scope of the project for which high-speed rail would be seeking environmental clearance. We are, of course, mindful of the federal deadlines that you face. So consistent with our discussions, the city will continue to invest in the multi-agency Diridon Integrated Station Concept Plan and Rail Corridor Plan for San Jose. Now, the 4 alternatives before the High-Speed Rail Authority Board do not align with San Jose's ambitions for Diridon Station, nor with our community's concerns regarding the alignment through Gardner and North Willow Glen, nor with the need for grade separations along the Monterey Corridor or in the Gardner neighborhood. And San Jose seeks a full partnership with high-speed rail to deliver a safe system that we will all be proud of. Our continued support for high-speed rail depends upon the High-Speed Rail Authority's willingness to adopt the work of multiple regional agencies constructing the Diridon Integrated Station Concept Plan for Diridon Station and track approach once it has been environmentally cleared. Linked with that, of course, is a commitment for a fair share contribution to building and rebuilding a Diridon station that will accommodate this very important project, making San Jose the first major city in the nation with a high-speed rail system. The city's continued support of high-speed rail further depends upon the commitment of investment and fair share for grade separation at 5 key intersections, Osray, Virginia, Branham, Skyway, and Chenoweth. Prior to 2018, the authority articulated a position that would fully grade separate tracks through San Jose. I think we all know that a system that will carry more than 600 trains a day through San Jose from across the state requires grade separations to comply with international best practices, to provide the speed that you need to get this train to San Francisco by the time designated in Prop 1A, and of course to provide our community with the safety it deserves. Grade separations certainly would make this very important segment commensurate with the many grade separations we see in Burbank, LA, Anaheim segments, as well as the 55 grade separations we see throughout Central Valley, surely in the largest city in Northern California, which will take the longest stretch of high-speed rail guideway of any city in the entire corridor. Our 1.1 million residents deserve safety that can be delivered only through these grade separations. I very much appreciate your patience allowing me to speak, and we look forward to working and continuing to work collaboratively with your staff to make a great project we'll all be proud of. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Liccardo, and thank you for your leadership and your ongoing partnership on. So we have a number of questions, thank you, and a number of public comments, and I just remind people if the comment you'd like to make is on the preferred alternatives, we'll make time for that later in the session, but for those that are not on preferred alternatives, I have a number of comment cards, and I'm going to call them in the order that we received them and ask you to come up and be brief with your comments. If after I call it, you're acknowledging that you really want to comment on the public alternatives, just say so, and we'll hold that card for that part of the discussion. Yes.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I just want to acknowledge Councilmember Miguel Arias from the City of Fresno in the audience.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. All right, so the first one we had is from John Ingo. I think I may have butchered your name. I apologize for that. From San Jose.
Good afternoon. I'd like to relinquish my time and let my comments as written stand. However, I'd like to just draw attention to the fact, pardon me.
I think our microphone's not working again. So is it working? Can you hear in the back? I saw someone waving. Can you hear? Try again.
I'll let my comments as stand as written.
Okay, thank you. We'll make sure the written comments are for the record. Jürgen Pfaff from Burlingame.
Hi, my name is Jürgen Pfaff. I'm for Burlingame. I'm not sure I understand this high-speed rail project anymore. It doesn't seem to have a lot to do with the original Proposition 1A that was approved. But here we are spending billions of dollars on a short section in the Central Valley, which is basically an Amtrak alternative. Is the real problem that we have in the state of California is actually a housing crisis in the metropolitan area. And yes, transit has something to do with it. I don't think that high-speed rail will be a viable alternative to a local mass transit system to help with the housing crisis. So I'm of the opinion that this project has no credible chance to ever be built because there is no funding plan, no business plan that I can see that actually meets the requirement of Proposition 1A. So I think that money should not be spent anymore on high-speed rail. I think that money should be spent on the metropolitan area's mass transit systems. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next will be Charles Volz from Burlingame.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I want to follow up on the comments of the mayor regarding the importance of grade separations, particularly who's going to pay for them and when, because as I understand the current policy of the board is to run several trains per hour, a combination of high-speed rail and Caltrain on the Mid-Peninsula, up to 10 trains per hour. And the problem is that in Burlingame and elsewhere, the places that emergency vehicles need to get to would be blocked by the lack of grade separations in the critical places. In particular, in Burlingame, it would be Burlingame High School. If there were an active shooter, it would be also our elementary school. It would be any place a disabled person like myself would need emergency care for ambulances. It would also involve the hotels in case of an earthquake or fire, which we've had in the past. And all of these places would be seriously at risk unless and until the necessary grade separations were existing. And as I understand, the current policy is to go ahead and run the trains and worry about the grade separations later. And I would like this board to agenda for a future meeting a policy that would say you're not going to run trains that would endanger public health and safety in Burlingame and other places because of the lack of adequate grade separations. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer Pfaff from Burlingame.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment. The dreamers in Silicon Valley claim that they cannot find workers. They want to bring workers from such places as Bakersfield, Fresno, Tracy, and Modesto to San Jose to staff the vast offices of the tech industry. But this is a pie-in-the-sky plan. The fare to get from the Valley to San Jose for one worker would be approximately $30,000 a year, give or take. Are these dreamers in Silicon Valley going to be able to pay for that or hike the workers' salaries by enough pay for that commute? And wouldn't that violate the fundamental premise of high-speed rail and Prop 1A, that the line must operate without a subsidy and no sprawl. And given the limited funds available, $5 billion in the bond fund, getting to San Jose will never happen. This is the famous Pacheco Pass route, requiring extensive full-bore tunnels and surmounting severe geological and engineering obstacles. Currently, this line is estimated to cost more than $25 billion. And where's that money going to come from? This is a crazy idea, and the dreamers of Silicon Valley would be better off building affordable housing for the workers in San Jose or Gilroy or Morgan Hill. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have 6 more comments on this section of the agenda. So what I'm going to do is call the next 3 to just so that we have everyone ready to comment to make sure that we're using good use of the public's time, and then I'll call the next 3. So the next 3 are Michael Brady from Menlo Park, Kathy Hamilton from Half Moon Bay, and Mike Futrell from South San Francisco. So Mr. Brady.
Thank you, Mike Brady from Menlo Park. There are $5 billion approximately left out of the $8 billion Proposition 1A bond fund. Those are sitting in the bond fund, that amount of money. Meanwhile, there's a big food fight going on. Southern California politicians and cities want to get their hands on that money. Silicon Valley, the Central Valley, want to get their hands on the money. Caltrain, San Francisco interests, want to get their hands on the money because of the disastrous financial condition of the Caltrain electrification program. You are the organization which has control of that money. You signed a contract with the federal government. You currently owe the federal government $3 billion of that $5 billion. Do you remember that? They were kind enough to advance the money for this high-speed Central Valley rail line because you pleaded that you had difficulty coming up with your obligation to match them dollar for dollar at the same time they put up the money you were supposed to put up the money. You didn't. So now you owe them $3 billion. Have you also forgotten your contract obligations that this line, the only line in the state that you're working on, and you haven't laid 1 inch of track, it's called the 119-mile Central Valley line. It's going to cost $12.1 billion. So you owe $3 billion right now to the federal government, and you'll be breach of your contract. You've been warned of that by the federal government, unless you pay them. And then you've got $12.1 billion to spend on the line. Where do you think you're going to get the money? That $5 billion is way short of what you owe and what you're going to have to spend. You are the contracting agency. You've got an obligation to stop the food fight.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. We're going to maintain the practice of not responding to individual comments, but appreciate the public commentary. Next is Ms. Hamilton.
Hi. Yeah, I'm Kathy Hamilton. I am a writer, an activist, and a board member of Community Coalition on High-Speed Rail. I believe Gary Patton sent a letter to the board yesterday. I wanted to say that Governor Brown promised a new approach to high-speed rail, and he called for more transparency and accountability. Transparency is not satisfied by posting change orders. That's something recently added, and it's a good thing. But presently, there are thousands of missing documents, no longer in the library. Though we are assured they have not been destroyed, the public's only recourse is to do public records requests. The public doesn't like to do public records requests. It takes a long time, and it makes them nervous. Doesn't make me nervous, because I ask for them all the time. But you have to know the name of the document that you're asking for, or it's impossible to get a document. You can't peruse through the library and say, okay, let me look here, let me look there. So that's really hard. Recently, activist Cindy Bloom out of Southern California went through the library and she requested enormous amounts of files. It came to her 30 days later with 12 unmarked CDs. Do you know how many documents are on 12 unmarked CDs? I've noticed that the business plans are not there prior to 2016. I know you no longer do transcripts of the meeting, which was enormously helpful. This is not transparency. These actions damage the credibility of Governor Brown's new board. In addition, I want to just say, where is the plan that Mr. Camacho asked for and has been delayed? It was first supposed to appear in July, and then we were promised September. Where is that plan to look at all the different segments according to certain criteria? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, we're not going to respond to individual questions, but they will be addressed as part of the CEO's report. So, Mr. Frutel, in just one moment, but let me also name the next three coming up so that they can be ready. William Warren from Palo Alto, Michael Serrato from Burlingame, and William Grinsley, I believe, Grindley from Atherton. And Mr. Frutel.
Yes, thank you. I'm Mike Futrell. I'm the city manager for the city of South San Francisco. We are a separate city from our larger city to the north, San Francisco. You probably know us from the sign on the hill that says the industrial city. I'm here on behalf of my mayor, Mayor Carol Matsumoto, who is leading her own public meeting as we speak, with a simple message of support and thank you, an unqualified statement of support for your work and the work of your staff, and to ask you to please, please build high-speed rail from San Francisco to San Jose to Merced, and finally, eventually one day, to Los Angeles. South San Francisco is experiencing unparalleled economic success, the kind of economic success that any city in the country would beg for. But we are dealing with the two-edged sword of housing and transportation. On the housing side, my city council has not turned down a single housing application, and we're building thousands of new houses in South San Francisco. On the transportation side, we have a $125 million local transit program already underway. We're with our businesses for a $350 million brand new transportation plan. In San Mateo County, passed a half-cent sales tax in November to bring billions locally to transportation. We need high-speed rail as an element of that to continue our economic success. South San Francisco is home to the world's largest life science research cluster with over 225 biotechnology companies, Genentech, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, AstraZeneca. They are all there, and that is growing at a tremendous rate. We expect 18,000 new biotech jobs in the next 30 months based on the construction underway, and you're a part of that. So please, we urge you to keep the faith, persevere. This is a very hard task you have before us, but it's super important for California. We can get this done, and we are there for you. South San Francisco will support you whether you need that support locally, regionally, in Sacramento, or in Washington, D.C. So thank you for your work.
Thank you. Mr. Warren.
Good afternoon. William Warren from Palo Alto, California. At the July board meeting, a document was delivered to you, the board, called If You Connect to ACE, They Still Will Not Come. I encourage you folks to read that because there's a fundamental truth in that. I had some handouts, which I don't know that you have received or not. It's a one-pager. It looks like this. Great. There is a fundamental truth there that I think you are about to prepare and build into the business plan, and that is that you cannot use ACE as a way of getting people, commuters, from the Bay Area, from Fresno. You can't have people going from Fresno to Merced to Stockton and then back down to San Jose. There isn't enough hours in the day for a commuter to do that. There's a fundamental flaw. Nobody has faced that. When you add up the hours, you're dealing with somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 8 hours of commuting. Nobody's going to do that. But you're effectively saying you're going to make, that is going to be the stopgap motion until you have a way to get through the Pacheco Pass. It isn't going to work. I strongly encourage you to look at this because the hours make sense, because it takes you right now 4 hours a day if you commuted from San Jose to Stockton on the ACE train that exists today. Now you want to take that train pivot it south out of Stockton down to Merced, you can't do that for zero time. It's going to be 8 to 9 hours for that commuter to get up in Fresno, through Stockton, down to San Jose, and go home at night. That's not a plan. That's a disaster waiting for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Serrato?
Michael Serrato, and I actually would like to address the board on item number 3. So maybe if you could pull my card.
Okay, we'll bring it back to the next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Grindley?
Good afternoon. William Grindley of Atherton. What are you afraid of? In January the 15th, I addressed your board with a study that took 3-man years of both Mr. Warren and myself, 6-man years, which concluded after over 12,000 calculations using your metric that you developed in 2008 in an EIR with the Federal Railroad Administration, that by virtue of total travel time, competitive between airlines and automobiles, high-speed rail's projections for 2018 are so off that it doesn't really make sense. In fact, from our calculations, that's 12,000 calculations, only 1 in every 5 of your forecasted riders will show up on the basis of total travel time. Now, why? Because you refuse to recognize it takes time to get to a high-speed rail station, to wait for a train, and then it takes time when the train stops near a destination to get off the train and get to the destination. That's not an insubstantial amount of time. I hear local towns talking about the wonders of high-speed rail. If it keeps stopping everywhere, that's not high-speed rail. So at that meeting, I was promised by the then chairman that I would hear from a staff member and that Mr. Warren and I would be invited to sit down and talk to staff about our findings. We admit we may be wrong in some of them, but 9 months later, no answer. So I repeat, what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any other public commentary cards for items?
No.
Other than 3 and 4? No. Okay. And thank you for public comments. Why don't we now move on to item number 1, which is considering approval of the minutes from July 18th.
So moved.
Move from Mr. Camacho. Is there a second? Second. Any additions or corrections? Call the roll, please.
Director Schenk?
Yes.
Vice Chair Richards?
Yes.
Director Curtin?
Yes.
Director Lowenthal?
Yes.
Director Camacho?
Yes.
Director Miller?
Yes.
Chairman Donsa?
Yes.
Director Perea?
I'll abstain.
Okay. Motion carries. Thank you. So move on to item number 2, NEPA assignment overview and update. And we'll start with a presentation from Mr. Mark McLoughlin.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the board. I'm Mark McLoughlin, the Director of Environmental Services for the Authority. I want to give you a brief NEPA assignment update today and some key points in our program. So just recently, just 6 months after Governor Brown requested a NEPA assignment for the Authority, right on schedule, we posted the state application online for public comment in November of 2017. And by June of 2018, both the application and the MOU were noticed in the public comment in the Federal Register. FRA then disengaged and did not sign the MOU until 1 year later. And on July 23, 2019, Governor Newsom signed the NEPA assignment MOU, which made it effective for the Authority and the state of California. As lead agency, the Authority is now responsible for the review and approval of environmental documents prepared under NEPA, such as those listed here. The Authority will also fulfill our lead agency responsibilities under other federal environmental laws. In addition, on Authority projects, we are also the lead agency for LA Metro's Link Us project, and eventually the ACE Forward project. Although the FRA is no longer prepares or reviews or approves the environmental documents, it does also retain other review and approval responsibilities for high-speed rail. These include our ongoing oversight responsibilities tied to the R grant and certain authorities that cannot be assigned to any state under NEPA assignment. Among those listed here, FRA's ongoing responsibilities to make air quality conformity determination, which is especially important as it relates to each ROD that we put before you, eventually the board. Excuse me. The authority NEPA team has already engaged with the FRA in biweekly meetings. We've had 2 of those so far since they've engaged back with us, and they're very motivated to help facilitate the assignment being off for almost a year. As required by the MOU, we're also working together, for example, to update our existing policies and procedures and to reflect our role as the lead agency. We're also preparing for annual FRA audits. We will have those annually by FRA who will audit our assignment, policies, procedures, our decisions, and how we've made and how we've worked through the process. We're also reviewing and approving project environmental documents currently, and as a lead agency, we've done 2 actions so far. We've approved 2 re-examinations to advance construction in the Central Valley, and we've also just recently released the Central Valley-wide draft supplemental EIR-EIS for in the federal comment period, which ends October 28th, and that coming next month. And we'll release the LGA final supplement for Fresno-Bakersfield EIS.
Can I just ask you to speak a little bit closer to the mic?
Sure. With that ends my presentation. Thank you.
You have impeccable timing.
Go back slides. I can do that. If
No, that's fine. Thank you. Just wanted to make sure that everyone on the phone could hear.
That's fine.
Okay, so let's open it up for questions and comments from the board. Any questions or comments?
Just one comment or one question, Mark. So, with regards to one of your bullet points on work to implement the NEPA assignment is now underway. Does it mean it's underway and we're not actually acting? We clearly are acting. So, have we got the policies and procedures in place to do this work that is now fallen on us at our request?
We currently started about half of our assignment of the assignment responsibilities last fall and roughly finished about half of those due to the FRA disengagement. We've also engaged with them. There's also have to be active participation by the FRA with us. So we're actually doing that right now. Approval of handbooks, policy and procedures are being put in place, and we are actively working with those existing ways of approval to make sure we can document currently while those policies are being developed and in place.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move on to item 5, which is request for CEO delegation of authority related to the NEPA assignment. So please continue and close to the mic now so I can hear you.
I will. Thank you. I'd like to introduce this item, and then Tom Falens will take over with more of a description for the delegation to the CEO regarding preferred alternatives that we talked about previously in Southern California and NEPA assignment.
Chairman Mendoza, board member, CEO Kelly, Tom Falens, lead counsel at High Speed Rail. This board item is an action item, and it's just asking for additional delegation of authority from the board to the CEO. The specific language showing the delegated authority changes are in the attachment, which is the board policy HSR 11-001, and it's now updated to today's date. And it's really to do a few what we believe to be fairly simple delegations that will help streamline and make it more efficient now that NEPA delegation is in place. First of all, it will allow the CEO to identify preferred alternatives for the NEPA process that have already been adopted by the board in the CEQA process. So that would apply to 4 Southern California sections: Bakersfield to Palmdale, Palmdale to Burbank, Burbank to Los Angeles, and Los Angeles to Anaheim. If there are alternatives, preferred alternatives that are significant in it, their changes from what the board had approved in the CEQA document, then that would have to come back to the board. And the description of what those circumstances would be is in the footnote number 2 in the board policy. So if there's a major revision to one of the to one of the alignments that significantly affects large populations, substantially different than what the previous alignment showed, then that would have to come back to the board. Secondly, what we're asking is for to approve the implementation of NEPA under the preferred alternative that the board had previously approved, and this would really apply to the LGA section, which is on the Fresno to Bakersfield section. So what this does is it delegates to the CEO the authority to approve the ROD. The board already approved the CEQA document, and now on the same basis, because it's the same alignment for the NEPA process, the CEO can go ahead and do that without having to come back to the board. So this is really for the purposes of being efficient, and so we're here to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Ryan, did you want to add anything to that? Or okay. Any questions or comments from the board?
This is Lynn. Just a quick question, Tom. So the changes, what's interlined on the red, those are the exact changes?
Correct, Board Member Shank, yes.
Thank you.
And so what that means is that everything else that's in black here, we've already acted on before. Is that correct? These are just the only deal?
Correct,
Okay.
Vice Chair Richards.
I was going to move the item.
So, any other questions or comments? Okay, please call the roll.
Director Schenk,
Yes.
Vice Chair Richards,
Yes.
Director Curtin,
Yes.
Director Lowenthal, Director Camacho,
Yes.
Director Miller,
Yes.
Chairman Donza,
Yes.
Director Perea.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Okay, we'll now move to item number 6, the CEO report. Mr. Kelly.
Good afternoon, good afternoon, members. I'm Brian Kelly, Chief Executive Officer for the High Speed Rail. My CEO report is just going to cover really 2 areas. The first is, while we had no meeting in August, no public meeting in August, there was a lot of activity that we worked through as an authority. I wanted to cover some of that with the board members, just walk through some of the things that we've accomplished over the course of the last couple of weeks, and then I want to describe for you what lays ahead with the board meeting both in October and the one that follows in November. So first, again, while we did not meet in August, I did forward a CEO report to the board, and we made that available on our website. There were some highlights of progress for the program that occurred between the July board meeting and today, and I wanted to just recap some of those. Of course, as you've heard already today, the State of California did execute the NEPA assignment agreement with the Federal Railroad Administration. As the board heard, this assignment is an environmental streamlining measure that has the state stand in the shoes of the FRA for purposes of carrying out the federal environmental review process. We are the first railroad project in the nation to be granted this assignment, and we are working closely with the FRA to ensure its success. And so I just wanted to recap that. Also in August, we settled the last CEQA lawsuit on the Fresno to Bakersfield section with the Kings County settlement. I want to particularly call out special kudos to our legal team and to the board member Richards for spearheading the negotiations to get that litigation settled, and for establishing a very important partnership with Kings County that will be important in the days and weeks ahead. Also in August, the governor's office announced key appointments to our executive team, and I'm particularly proud of these appointments. That announcement of 4 new folks working at the authority include the first ever female chief counsel, the first ever female chief engineer in the authority's history. I think that's very significant. We've also elevated Meg Cederoth to our Director of Planning and Sustainability, and we announced Melissa Figueroa as our new Director of Communications. The board will have the opportunity to meet each of these new additions and exceptional professionals at our October hearing in Sacramento. Of course, as is evident today, the Senate President Pro Tem Tony Atkins also appointed the members and reappointed the members to our board, both board member Henry Perea and the reappointment of Ernie Camacho. Congratulations to you both. On Labor Day, we were pleased to announce that we passed 3,000 workers dispatched to our construction project in the Central Valley. This is, of course, further evidence of the strong economic impact from the investment in high-speed rail in California. We now have over 3,000 workers and more than 500 small businesses that have worked on this project to date, and that number continues to grow as construction opportunities expand. Last week included two more important announcements that are worth covering with the board. The first was our initial action taken under NEPA assignment, in which we released publicly the draft final EIS for the Central Valley Y section. The document is available now for public review and comment, and we look forward to bringing the record of decision for this section to the board in 2020. The second announcement we made last week was the execution of a memorandum of understanding with Los Angeles Metro, LA Metro, in which we outlined our cooperation and collaboration for the reconstruction of the LA Union Station project. The authority is providing $423 million toward that project, which will improve regional transit services in the short term and accommodate high-speed rail operations into Union Station in the longer term. Board members Camacho and Lowenthal were integral to the MOU's execution. I want to acknowledge them and thank them for their participation in that process. We are now getting to work on the necessary statutory agreements that we have to develop for that project with the Department of Finance and with LA Metro for the funding, full funding to be made available for that project. So again, while we didn't meet in August, I just thought it was worthwhile to recap several of the activities that have been ongoing over the course of the last several weeks. In terms of future board meetings, just a reminder, our October meeting will be held in Sacramento on October 15th. At that meeting, the board will receive the reports requested from our early train operator regarding the side-by-side on investment options, and from our consultant group, KPMG, on the refined business case for the Merced to Bakersfield option. At the request of board member Arambula, we are also scheduled to hold our November board meeting in Fresno on November 19th. Among other items at this hearing, the board will hear the staff recommendation for advancing the track and systems RFQ into the RFP phase. This is an important step so that a final decision of the T&S contractor can come to the board in June of 2020. Okay. And then lastly, I just wanted to answer one comment that was made about documents that we have available or don't have available on our website. And mostly it's just to acknowledge and say that, like all state agencies and California government, we've gone through a process of remediating our documents that are available on our websites to ensure that they are ADA compliant prior to them being available on the website. We remediated several thousand pages of documents and declared on July 1st that all the documents on our website were indeed remediated and ADA compliant. There are some documents that had to come down off the website while we remediate those documents. I think the best example is our prior business plans. All of them came off for some time while we remediate those. They will be fully remediated before they're available once again on the website. This is not a process or a project that is limited to high-speed rail. It is a broad project with all state agencies to ensure compliance with the ADA. And so I just wanted to make that clarification. That concludes my CEO report for today, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there are.
I have one quick question. You just explain in English for the public what remediation is underway, what that means for the website.
I'll do my best. In essence, there are documents that are available on the website that are difficult for somebody with disability to access or use tools or equipment they may have at home to read those documents. Sometimes it involves a voice read over or other things. There are color graphics that are a part of the solution. So like I said, all state agencies had to review the documents on their website and assure that they are remediated to make that process much more accessible for any individual with a disability that needs that assistance. And so the process is what we call a paper remediation process to make sure the documents, when they're back on the website, are compliant. And that's what we did. There's a whole guideline and entity that produces what the standards are, and we work to meet those standards.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any questions or comments for Brian? Okay, thank you.
Danny, wait,
Oh, did you have one? Sure, go ahead, Danny.
Yeah. As I've said in the past, my concerns are that we have this 119-mile requirement, and we need to make sure we get this done in a very, very tight timeline. So I couldn't help but looking at the article yesterday. I wanted to ask just one or two quick questions. The one piece that got my attention was that, and whether it's accurate or not, I wanted to get a little clarification, that we're looking at 4 out of 50 bridges, viaducts, et cetera, actually starting work or having work on them. Can you tell me where that is? Because that sounded like an extraordinary, difficult goal to meet in the next couple of years.
I'm sorry, can you restate the question?
Yeah,
I missed.
in the, again, I don't know the accuracy of the article or, that sort of thing, but it indicated that only 4 of 50 bridges, viaducts, and other structures are actually having work on them. I'm assuming that's in the 119 corridor from Madera to
Yeah, I mean, the article covered the 119 mile construction set from CPs 1 to 4.
Yeah. So, I mean, that seemed like an extraordinary number. I mean, could you give me an update, give us an update about where that is, Joe, whoever?
Yes, sir. What's important about CP23 is that majority of those structures are type 2 structures. They're not on critical path. The great news is right now is that we've just renegotiated the CDFW permits, which allows us basically to finalize the wildlife permeability issues associated with these major type 1 structures, the long viaducts. What we have right now on the critical path is those designs have begun and are advancing, and we're planning for the early start of construction for those structures. I acknowledge that there's only basically 7 structures right now with regards to CP2, 3 that are underway, but what's more importantly is we're about ready to launch into these long viaducts, which is the critical path for the program to achieve RO.
Okay, but from my perspective, that whole 119 is sort of a critical path. I'm not talking in a technical term here, but...
It is, sir. Yeah, the 119 is a critical path, but you have to acknowledge that there are specific work items on the combined schedules that drive the critical path of the program. The critical path of the program is on these long structures that have been delayed with regards to the wildlife permeability associated with the ATCs that go back to time of award when the guideway was dropped to the deck.
Okay, so we're still, I mean, on the critical path and the entire 119, still looking at meeting the deadlines as required by the FRA at whatever period of time, 2022?
Yes, I mean, as we've stated before, the deadline for the construction work that we have to complete in the 119 is daunting. And particularly in light of the fact that a lot of the first order work, project development work, right-of-way, third-party agreements and other things were not completed at an earlier point. However, Joe has led a task force that goes down to the valley every week on CPs 1, 2, 3, and 4, goes through a checklist of the things that we got to get done. And as we discussed in the the F&A committee prior to the full board, there is a plan that Joe will be coming forward with to F&A in October that lays out exactly where we are in right-of-way, where we are in third-party agreements, and how we'll move the work forward.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I mean, I know it's an enormous task, and it's been an issue that from day one on my presence on this board, right-of-way and third-party relocation was an enormous complex and difficult. So you referenced that you're looking at policies and procedures, and that, I'm assuming, is what you're referring to in the article, that we're actually putting some new procedures and policies together to get our hands around the third party and the relocation issues and the right-of-way issues.
Well, when you say policies and procedures, I mean, what we're doing is executing agreements
Yeah.
with some of the third-party partners that were not in place. Things like, access agreements to move the utilities from one
Okay,
location
but so those are not,
to
in other words,
another.
you're moving the ball on those agreements, but there's not any actual policy type shift on how you're doing it. It's just you're getting down, knuckling down, and getting it done.
I mean, Joe, if there's anything you want to add, I would say this. This is about putting your head down and doing the work.
Yeah.
And so you go down there and you look at what the challenges are, and all of them are, as Joe articulated earlier, the F&A committee, are a project by project,
Right.
challenge by challenge effort. As I said, Joe has led a team that includes our right-of-way folks, our third-party commercial folks, and others. We go down and we take up each of these issues one by one. And he has a 20-page matrix in CP1, about a 45-page matrix in CP2-3, and about a 20-page in CP4. And you just go through and you check off the list as you accomplish the tasks.
Okay, well,
and that's
all
the
I can-
process that we're in.
I appreciate that, and it's, the frustration is not now, in the past, that we didn't actually take these as seriously as we should have, because that's what gotten us into this bind now. And maybe there's ability to do multiple, instead of one at a time, have 2 or 3 teams and do them all one at a time, so that you're doing 2 or 3 in a day, or whatever the heck it is. But I know it's a daunting task. I just want to make sure we're staying focused as a board, as well as, on the authority, that we meet the 119 as
Yeah.
as
I mean,
much as
Joe
possible.
also mentioned at the F&A, that's worth repeating here, that we are applying some what's called Lean Six Sigma principles to the right-of-way process, where you cut out any inefficient parts of that process to streamline it, move as quickly as we can. That's a process we have.
Lean
underway.
Six
Right.
Sigma?
Lean Six Sigma, which is essentially a process of making sure that your decisions are efficient, that you're cutting out any unnecessary steps.
Okay, that
and
sounds
you're
like
moving
a
forward as
new
quickly as
policy
you
to
can.
me, which is making me feel happy. We could have done a Lean Six Sigma 2 years ago. We wouldn't be having this conversation. So, all right, thank you.
Sure. Joe.
Hey, any other questions or comments? Please, Pani.
Well, first of all, Brian, I want to thank you for coming down to Los Angeles. Ernie and I are really pleased to participate. And for all of those who say, is it going to happen in Southern California, I think that MOU goes a long way to answer people's questions. It occurred to me when you were having the FNA discussion and you mentioned that the irrigation districts, which there are so many of them, are a challenge for you to have access, make agreements with. We have 3 authority members from the Central Valley who are very well versed with the people in those irrigation districts. Joaquin, Henry Perea, and Tom Richards know the people, work with them all the time, have close relationships. So I would implore you to use our own people to further your desire to get some of these contracts done. Nobody knows better than these guys.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Just for the record, I'd like to note that I consider myself half a member from the Central Valley, having spent half my life there.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
That makes 4.
3.5.
Joe, earlier today, I asked a question relative to construction and the amount of construction. And maybe for the full board, I'd like to ask it again. The construction activity for CP 1, 2, 3, and 4 amounts to about $20 million for ending July. Could you give us a rough order of magnitude what it may have been then for August?
Sir, right now, I don't have the August numbers, but in July, CP23 was 17.7 was the approved invoice. 13 billion with regards to CP1 as reported. Million, sorry. Always think big here. So, and then CP4 was at 8.
Those are what's in the minutes of the FNA. So August is going to grow probably by another 10 or 15%. And you're seeing too, the biggest indicator right now of that is if you go back and you look at the number of workforce on the jobs, it's doubled since March. It's on a steady climb.
So what CP 1, 2, 3, and 4, cumulatively, you would say it's about 15%, 10 to 15% more?
Approximately 10 to 15. I have to go check, sir.
That's, I mean,
just swagments. We're making incremental gains.
All I was looking for is that graph to turn the other way.
No, it is. And if you look at it, the curve's been up for the last couple of months. And the biggest indication, like I said, is CP4 is held at 8 million for the last 2 months.
I think that's the reason it's so important for us to at least get, what we have concretely. We knew at the end of July it was this number, and if we can't get a hard number for August or September, that it would help us if you give us at least best guesstimates or.
Yes, sir. We can do that, and we can also I monitor the KPIs with regards to weekly, with regards to performance on PG&E, and with regards to the number of people out on the job site as a leading edge indicator of performance.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I think if we just implement what we talked about in F&A today with your reports in October, it'll give everybody a lot more comfort, not necessarily comfort, but we'll have the information that I think that we can draw the conclusions as to where we are and how rapidly we're getting there. So I think the plan is in place, and we'll look forward for your implementation of it and then delivery to F&A next month.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, thank you. Then move on to item number 7. I know Vice Chair Richards, most of the members of the board were at the F&A committee, but is there anything you'd like to add to that discussion?
No, I think other than Danny Curtin, I think we were all there, but you got your comments in, and I appreciate those also, Danny. So we are working on addressing with refined reporting some of the information that you were talking about earlier. Hopefully we'll see that in a form that we can look at and rely upon from month to month at F&A, and then call out to the board.
Okay, thank you. And if there are no other comments or questions on that item, we'll move back to item number 3. And we just to remind everyone, what we're going to do here is we're going to do item number 3, then have public comment, then we'll do item number 4 and have public comment. So, Boris, please take it for number 3.
Great. Thank you, Chairman Mendonca, and board members, Boris Lipkin, Northern California Regional Director. And first, thank you for being here in San Jose today for this meeting. As you know, we're taking a big step in Northern California, and it's important that you get to hear directly from the public that's here, that's living in the communities along the route that we're going to be talking about today. Also, before I jump into the actual presentation, this has been a big effort by the Northern California team. I just want to take a second to thank many of the staff that have really worked hard on both the technical work to get us to this point, as well as all of the outreach that we've conducted over the last couple months. I'll just mention some of the folks who have been integral to this. Gary Kennerly, Dave Schbach, James Tung, Morgan Galley, Phyllis Potter, Chris Diwa, Bruce Fukuji, Julian Bertina, Yosef Yip, Yvonne Chan, and then the entire HNTB, ICF, and Kearns and West teams. And then along with those folks, my predecessor in these shoes, Ben Traposis, is also here and has been along for much of the ride to get to this point. And so it has been a large undertaking by the entire project team here in the Bay Area. And so we just want to make sure that they get recognized as for the hard work that's gone into this step in the process. So I think, Chairman Mendonca, you laid out sort of the objective of identifying the preferred alternative. So what the ask is of the board is to concur with the staff recommendation of identifying alternative 4 as the preferred alternative for the San Jose to Central Valley Y extent of the San Jose to Merced project section for purposes of the draft EIR-EIS. In sort of common CEQA parlance, this would be the equivalent of the proposed project. being moved forward, and at many agencies, this would be something that staff would do on our own and then just include in the draft environmental documents. I think it's a great move that the board has asked us to, instead of just making those decisions ourselves, that instead what we go through is the process that we've done here over the last few months is do the analysis, release the staff recommendations, vet those with the communities along the routes, bring that feedback back to you, and then give you the opportunity to guide us in what you would like to see as the preferred alternative in the draft environmental documents. And so that's kind of what we're here to do today. The other thing that I'll mention, and I think you brought it up as well, Chairman, that this is not a final decision. I think the way to describe it is I'm not sure if this is the end of the beginning or beginning of the end of the process, but that's somewhere kind of on the balance of where we're at, that there's a lot more for us to do as we get to the draft environmental document stage, more opportunities for public comment and input for us to consider, and then coming back to you for adoption of the final project after the final EIR is completed. So to give you a sense of kind of what we've done up to this point, we have gone through a process of identifying a range of alternatives and refining those over time. I'll describe a little bit of the steps that we've taken over the last 10 years to get here. Over the last year and a half, we really focused on the evaluation of those alternatives, and the results of that evaluation are the heart of this presentation. As I mentioned, we released those recommendations back in July and have been vetting those with the public and have lots of input that we've already gathered and more that you'll hear directly from folks today. And then we're here back with step 3, asking you to concur with our recommendations and give us direction for the next step. So in this project section, the evaluation of alternatives has really been about a 10-year process starting in 2009. We took a first go at it in the 2010 to 2014 timeframe, looked at all sorts of different options of different routes in this project section, took a little bit of a hiatus as focus for the agency shifted to Southern California, and then came back, refined those previous options in 2016 and 17, and then after the 2018 business plan added a fourth alternative that I'll describe in a little bit more detail over that time. And of course, public input has been a critical component of the entire process along the way.
Mr. Chairman, if I may for a moment, would you explain to the public what checkpoint B means?
Yes, thank you, Vice Chairman Richards. Checkpoint B is a marker in our agreements with federal regulatory agencies for them to concur with the range of the alternatives that we have under study. And so that's been an important component of our agreements with the federal government on how we do the environmental process. The input that we've gotten over just the last 3 years, we've had over 500 different meetings and engagements, really getting in-depth and understanding and input from communities that know their areas much better than we would. And that's been incredibly valuable for us across sort of our normal and regularly scheduled community and technical working groups, public open houses, as well as other engagements. The blue bar is the outreach just focused on the preferred alternative that we've done over the last couple months before coming back to you. Along with the members of the public and communities, we've also had the privilege of interfacing with many different agencies along the route that have jurisdiction over different areas. And so this is not, I'm not going to go through this but line by line, but just to give you a sense of some of the great input that has led us to this point and has helped us refine the alternatives along the way before bringing them to you. This has been a large partnership. This project section covers about 84 miles, and so we've had lots of engagement with both communities and agencies with jurisdictions in this project section. To walk you kind of relatively quickly through the process of developing the range of alternatives, I'm not going to pause in great depth on every slide because there's a lot of history here that has happened over time. But sort of the first range of decisions was in 2005 and 2008 to decide to connect the Silicon Valley and Central Valley. Would we use the Altamont Pass or the Pacheco Pass? That decision was made in 2008, and that moved us forward into looking at the various options of how we could get from San Jose down through Gilroy and then across the Pacheco Pass out to the Central Valley. We started with probably a couple dozen different route options, everything east, west, north, south, and really kind of a broad spectrum of things that we looked at. As I mentioned, we first narrowed that down in that 2011, 2012, 2013 timeframe after the analysis that was done at the time. When we came back in 2016 and 17, things had evolved on the ground, and so we needed to make adjustments and refine the alternatives that we had had previously. And then, as I mentioned, out of the 2018 business plan, we had one more alternative that got added to get to the final 4 options that we are looking at here today. So for this project section, it spans all the way from Scott Boulevard in Santa Clara on the north side of the map, down through San Jose and Gilroy, and then across the Pacheco Pass to Carlucci Road, which is in Merced County. It's about 84 total miles. In the range of alternatives, we have 4 different options, but for parts of the route, they will sometimes overlap. So for example, when we going through Pacheco Pass, all of the alternatives are the same, have the same horizontal and vertical profile in that part of the corridor. The differentiation is when we have 2, 3, or 4 different options between San Jose and Gilroy. Just to kind of orient you to what the various elements that we will talk about are, so I think many of you are probably familiar with this already. When we have dedicated corridors, so when it's just high-speed rail using the corridor, we have generally either a viaduct, which is an aerial structure, many of which we're building in the Central Valley, an embankment, or a dedicated grade corridor where we're separated from any adjacent other rail operators. In the alternative 4 that we added from the 2018 business plan, we have a blended configuration. So this is where we would share tracks with the commuter rail operator, Caltrain in this case, as well as sharing the corridor with the Union Pacific Freight Railroad. And then through Pacheco Pass, we have our twin-bore tunnels to get through the mountains. We have a couple of those. To walk through the project section, we have broken it down into several subsections. Starting with the Diridon approach, we have 2 different alternative options here with 1 design variation, starting with where the viaduct starts for the aerial options in alternatives 1, 2, and 3, either at Scott Boulevard or I-880, going through at an aerial Diridon station before continuing over highways 280 and 87, and then coming back to grade around after Tamian Station. And then the second option that we have in this project section is utilizing the existing rail corridor with an at-grade Diridon station, and then continuing through the existing Caltrain corridor up through the Tamian Station. In the Monterey corridor, this is South San Jose, we have 3 options in the range of alternatives. One is a viaduct down the middle of Monterey Road, taking 2 of the lanes to create the space for the viaduct. Alternative 2 is a fully grade separated embankment between the existing rail corridor and the Monterey Road. And then alternative 4 utilizes the existing rail corridor throughout this area. When we get down through to Morgan Hill and San Martin, we similarly have 3 alternative options. Alternatives 1 and 3 are the viaduct that swings to outside of the downtown Morgan Hill and towards 101, staying on the west side of the highway before coming back in San Martin. And then alternative 2 and alternative 4 go through downtown Morgan Hill. Alternative 2 grade separating all of the streets and creating a dedicated corridor adjacent to the existing rail corridor. And then alternative 4 using the existing rail corridor. And then finally, the differentiation is at its peak when we get to Gilroy. This is where we have 2 station options. One in alternative 3 is the East Gilroy station out by where the outlet malls are there. And then alternatives 1, 2, and 3 utilizing either a viaduct, embankment, or the existing rail corridor to get to a downtown Gilroy station where the existing Caltrain station is. And then all of the alternatives converge at Tunnel 1, which is next to Casa de Fruta as we start to get through the Pacheco Pass. The Pacheco Pass section includes our long tunnel in this project section, the 13.5-mile tunnel that swings north of the San Luis Reservoir. And then we get out after I-5 into the San Joaquin Valley, where we have a mix of embankment and viaduct structures to have for the guideway. In the Grasslands Ecological Area, which is a sensitive wildlife area out in this project subsection, we are consistent with our programmatic EIR-EIS commitment of a viaduct through the area to minimize the impacts to the wildlife there. And then, of course, this is an area that we have continued engagement with folks with expertise in this particular area and have lots of sensitive habitat there that we will continue to engage with along the way. And of course, there'll be a lot more on this as we get into the draft EIS. So that's the setup. That's the range of alternatives to give you the lightning tour of the project section. Now for the analysis that we've conducted, there's a broad range of things that we will cover in the draft EIS. When it comes to identifying a preferred alternative, our focus is on those areas that are differentiators between the alternatives. So there's other things that are important and we will cover in full when we get to the next stage in the process. But right now we're focused on those areas that will have a market difference between the alternatives so that we can give you our best understanding of where we might be headed. And in the analysis that we've done, as you can imagine, there's not going to be a perfect answer that just on every single category that we would look at will perform the best. This is complicated and there's a whole bunch of trade-offs that come with identifying a preferred alternatives. So really what we're looking for is a balance between the system performance, operations, and cost characteristics. So this is sort of what the high-speed rail infrastructure will look like, how will it perform. The set of environmental factors, many of which have a substantial regulatory burden to them. And then, of course, the important community factors, which are either things affecting communities along the route or things that we've heard through our outreach that folks wanted us to look into. And so the kind of roll-up of all of this, I'll cover briefly. In your board memo, there's actually numbers for many of these different metrics, and you can see how the different alternatives stack up. Of course, there's also a full staff report that gets into the next layer of detail and analysis that's attached to the board item as well. To cut to the chase, the staff is recommending that alternative 4 be identified as the preferred alternative for the draft EIS. This includes the blended system, extending the blended system from San Jose, where it's currently supposed to terminate, down to Gilroy, and then continuing on a dedicated route through the Pacheco Pass. When we compare the system performance characteristics, alternative 4, by using the blended system, we give up several minutes of travel time. So the fastest route that we could pick would be alternative 3, which is a dedicated corridor swinging and cutting off the corner there through the East Gilroy Station. Those several minutes, though, are something that we make up for in other parts of the system. And then, of course, there's a lower capital cost associated with utilizing the existing rail corridor. On the community factors, this is where you start to see some of the benefits of utilizing that existing corridor. So across the many areas of displacement, so residential, commercial, public facilities, and agricultural impacts, we see the lowest impact from alternative 4. So by using what's already a railroad use of the space, we have less impacts to everything outside of the rail corridor. We also have better consistency with the Gilroy General Plan with the station location and lower visual impacts. But we do have trade-offs on the other side where we have higher noise impacts because we have the Edgar crossings where trains will blow their horns. And then, of course, on some of the environmental justice factors, by swinging to East Gilroy where there's less population, we avoid some of those impacts to those communities in alternative 3. Across the environmental factors, across the board on waters and wetlands, habitat and other natural resources, parks and historic resources, this is where kind of alternative 4 really shines by being able to utilize what's already an existing rail corridor. And then finally, from a extra kind of policy perspective, alternative 4 provides for the ability to extend the blended system down to Gilroy, which is something that the communities in South San Jose and South Santa Clara County have wanted better Caltrain commuter rail service. And so this option allows us to leverage our planning and our investment to also have additional benefits to those communities. And Caltrain's undertaken a business plan to develop a long-range service vision that has also looked at the opportunity for them to piggyback off of what we're doing here And if we move forward with alternative 4 ultimately, then being able to use that infrastructure for better commuter rail service so that we get more bang for our buck of what we can do with the rail corridor here. So to roll all of that up, we do see trade-offs with the alternatives, but when we take it all kind of in summary form, our recommendation for alternative 4 is based on having the fewest displacements, fewest impacts to natural resources and wetlands and other habitats. We give up a little bit of travel time and have a little bit more noise from alternative 4. But of course, we also have the lowest capital cost and then the best leverage of our investment towards allowing that extended Caltrain service. Now, as I mentioned, we released these recommendations back in July, and we've had an extensive outreach program over the last couple of months trying to gather feedback. In your packet, there's another report that's a summary of all of the feedback that we've received. I'm going to relatively quickly cover some of those highlights because I know there's many members of the public who will give you their feedback directly, so I don't want to step on their toes. But just to give you a sense, this is our summary of what we did in July and August. In July, we were focused on our technical community working groups, and then we had public open houses in August with engagements with sort of city councils and county board of supervisors and others along the way and interspersed in between. Sort of key themes out of all of that engagement, we heard lots of support and lots of interest in the mobility that high-speed rail provides and really focused on both the connection between Silicon Valley and the Central Valley that is critical for this project section is the enabling piece of for that, as well as the entire Phase 1 system and the connections down to Southern California. We heard lots of really positive reaction to the Alternative 4's ability to minimize residential and commercial displacements, which are issues that we had certainly heard before related to some of the other alternatives that we've studied. As I think you heard from the mayor, I think he articulated quite well the interest in great separations across the corridor, and especially in San Jose, focused on safety, traffic, noise, and emergency vehicle response times. Because Alternative 4 has those train horns, there's a lot more concern about noise impacts and interest in how that'll be studied and what mitigations will be proposed in the draft EIR-EIS. We heard about community cohesion in the greater Gardner area, and I know there's some representatives here who will speak to that further. And then in Los Banos, we heard interest for a station there. Prop 1A, of course, doesn't allow us to have a station between Gilroy and Merced, but there's a lot of opportunities for us to look at how we improve mobility from that area. And then we also got feedback on historical and cultural resources as well. Just to give you a quick snapshot from the 3 sets of groups that we were engaged with, in our community working group in this area, we didn't hear a ton of interest in one of the other alternatives from the range of alternatives under study, except for the area around Gardner, where there's interest in the I-280-87 option of going around that area instead of through the existing rail corridor. What we did hear was, of course, a lot of interest in great separations as a add-on element above and beyond what we have on top of Alternative 4. At our open houses, first we heard lots of support for the project and for the preferred alternatives, and especially focused on those key differentiating factors of reducing residential displacement, but of course on the trade-off side, the noise impacts associated with some of those that option. We also heard lots of discussion and interest of how the extended blended system would work down to Gilroy and what that would mean for communities along the route and what our plans are and how we're going to collaborate with our partners at Caltrain. And then finally, from cities and councils, I think I don't need to repeat the mayor's feedback. I know there's also representatives here from Gilroy Gilroy was supportive of Alternative 4, and they'll speak to that themselves, as well as from Morgan Hill, and I know their city manager will be able to provide you their feedback directly. I think you've already laid out our next steps after today's hearing. This is sort of the last thing that we need in order to get to the draft environmental document stage. We anticipate those being out early next year, and then getting feedback through a 45-day public comment period, and then getting to a final EIR-EIS that we would bring back to you for certification in early 2021. So I think with that, I'm going to pause here and ask for your concurrence on the recommendation after you hear from members of the public as well.
Great. Thank you very much for the thorough report and all the hard work. What we're going to do now is, excuse me, have time for public comment on this agenda item, and then we will come back, ask you to come back up if board members have comments or questions, and then vote on the recommendation. So I have over 20 comments, so I'm going to group them 3 or 4 at a time and ask people to come up so we can get as good use of the public's time as possible, and ask everyone to please keep your comments brief and to the point. And so I'm going to call the first 4 up. If you would come up, Michael Serrato from Burlingame, Bert Weaver from San Jose, Jason Kim from San Jose, and Alvaro Metz, I believe, I apologize if I said that wrong, from Gilroy. So let's begin with Mr. Serrato. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael Serrato. I'm the president of the Hollister Land.
Could you get a little closer to the mic just so we can hear you? Thank you.
I'm the president of the Hollister Land and Cattle Company, which is the largest single private landowner in the grasslands ecological area. And I'm here to express my concerns about the alignment of alternative number 4 through the grasslands ecological area. The primary thing that strikes me is that over the years, the Hollister Land and Cattle Company was formed in 1927 on lands owned by the Miller and Lux Cattle Company. It's within the historic floodplain of the San Joaquin River. And over the years, the federal government, the state government, private landowners have contributed millions and millions of dollars to create the grasslands ecological area. The federal government, for example, has created the San Luis National Wildlife Refuge. The Bureau of Reclamation supports the Central Valley Project Improvement Act, which supplies water to the grasslands. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has purchased easements on private landowners' property to the extent of millions of dollars. These are waterfowl habitat easements. The federal government provides grants under the North American Waterfowl Conservation Act to private duck clubs in conjunction with conservation organizations like Ducks Unlimited and the California Waterfowl Association. The state of California has provided refuges. Our organization has a budget of $432,000 this year, and that will be used entirely, either directly or indirectly, to support waterfowl and waterfowl habitat. I urge you to adopt the proposals suggested by the Grasslands Water District representatives to either put the train underground, put a physical shield above it, or abandon the project altogether and put the train through the Altamont Pass corridor.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Serrato. Mr. Weaver?
Hello, I'm Bert Weaver. I represent the Delmas Park neighborhood on the San Jose Community Working Group. Delmas Park neighborhood is the area that includes all of the area around Diridon Station. I want to agree with the neighbors that you're going to hear from very soon from Gregory Plaza, North Willow Glen, and Gardner, that the at-grade track alignment south of Diridon Station is a bad idea. Part of why it's a bad idea is that it would create an extremely unsafe condition in Gregory Plaza by blocking one of the 2 access routes in and out of the area. In addition, it would essentially close Azarez Avenue because of, for most of the day, just because of the high number of trains going back and forth across that at-grade crossing. This is simply unacceptable. There is a solution. Put all of the electric trains on an elevated viaduct over the freeways skirting the neighborhood. You've already heard from Mayor Liccardo. Should also note that Dave Cortese of the County Board of Supervisors also supports this alternative of a elevated viaduct. And I urge you to reject option 4 and instead adopt the elevated viaduct option.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Mr. Kim?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jason Kim. I'm here representing the Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority, VTA. We want to express our support for the high-speed rail program and the preferred alternative. We want to thank high-speed rail staff for all their ongoing coordination with VTA concerning this project, and we look forward to continued coordination with all the work we'll be continuing to do with this program. We want to ensure that our continued coordination would potentially resolve and minimize all conflicts going forward, and we want to specifically call out all the work that we're doing together on the Deer Darn project and look forward to all the additional work we'll be doing in terms of what happens next with the preferred alternative, including aspects of community involvement and anything related to other potential work needing to be done with this preferred alternative. So again, we want to express our support for the high-speed rail program and the preferred alternative. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. And as Mr. Metz, I believe that's named, did I say that right? Close. Okay, so as you're coming up, let me name the next four so you can have them be prepared behind you. Rain Akeona, Teresa Alvarado, Steve Roberts, and Harvey Darnell, if you could be prepared. So please, go ahead, and I apologize for saying your name wrong.
No worries, and thank you, and good afternoon, Board of Directors. It's my pleasure to be here in support of Alternative 4. My name is Alvaro Mesa. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Business Services and Chief Business Official for the Gilroy Unified School District. We're in complete support of Alternative 4, as it would avoid our educational facilities, which of course are significant. One being the middle school, which serves 900 students. The second one being our only charter school in Gilroy Unified, which serves 540 students. Our really main concern is that intersection of IOF and Monterey. As we are in support of the blended alternative at grade, half of the trains are going to travel at 110 miles an hour, half of them may stop. So where in particular concern is our safety of the students, pedestrians, and elderly. So we look forward to the process of reviewing the EIR, making our comments public. So it won't be the last time that you hear from me. But we certainly think that the city, the Gilroy Unified School District, our city is excited for this project, and we're 100% in support of it. We just want to make sure that our pedestrians, our young students, our youth are safe. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Meza. Rain Akeona, and I apologize in advance if I'm not saying your name properly.
Better than most. Well, first I want to start off. My name is Rem, and I'm the Environmental Program Director for Bowles Farming Company, through which the alignment bisects our operation. However, I'm not here on behalf of our own troubles and issues associated with the project. I'm sort of more concerned about some of the more communal issues that are associated with the alignment of the project. I spent the last decade working as an ecologist in the Grasslands Wildlife Management Area.
Could I ask you to speak just a little closer?
Sure,
There we
I
go. Thank you.
apologize. So I spent the last decade working as an ecologist in the Grasslands Wildlife Management Area. And as an ecologist who has monitored and captured animals and knows the sound of birds flying across the grasslands and knows the wildflowers that exist there, I cannot tell you that you can underestimate the sort of the ancient tie, or the ecological character of those lands. However, I think beyond that sort of loose and philosophical value of those landscapes, I think there's a more pragmatic value to those grasslands ecological areas. Currently, the grasslands ecological area, due to its size and its orientation, might be the last opportunity for ecological connection throughout the San Joaquin Valley. In their California Essential Connectivity Project, Caltrans and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife identify the grasslands as one of only 2 major California essential connectivity areas in the San Joaquin Valley. In turn, agencies, NGOs, landowners, ranchers, farmers have all invested heavily into finding creative solutions that build habitat connectivity in this region, such that it can sustain wildlife populations for millennia. We are in trust of a challenge here in the state of California. We have a history wherein development and infrastructure have at times been found at odds with our resource interests. And with a community that's increasingly sensitive to this history, I cannot understate the path to success upholds these wildland interests. And I know I'm out of time, but I will tack on. I do understand that the board has received commentary from agencies in the area, and I would charge that the board review those letters personally prior to making the decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Alvarado?
Good afternoon, board members. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comments regarding the proposed preferred alternative for the San Jose to Merced project section. Determining a preferred alternative is an important milestone for high-speed rail to continue planning efforts for this crucial segment. SPUR supports staff's recommendation as laid out in the memorandum. SPUR, the San Francisco Bay Area Planning and Urban Research Association, is an early supporter of high-speed rail, having authored numerous reports and articles on how high-speed rail benefits California and how the Bay Area can make the most of high-speed rail. 2 years ago, following a SPUR-sponsored study trip to high-speed rail station cities in Europe, the California High-Speed Rail Authority joined the Valley Transportation Authority, Caltrain, and the City of San Jose in a cooperative agreement to create and deliver the Diridon Integrated Station Concept Plan. The DISC plan must ensure that high-speed rail service is planned in a way to achieve high-speed rail's ridership projections and infrastructure requirements. Likewise, it is critical for the high-speed rail project to effectively integrate into the transit network of local communities in which it is linked. Therefore, we recommend the ongoing involvement of high-speed rail staff in the DISC planning process and urge high-speed rail to adopt the DISC rail alignment plan. It is imperative that the planning efforts underway today will enable the DISC partners to deliver on the world-class multimodal station design and service integration that we aspire to achieve. That can only happen in unison, and the benefit of collaboration really cannot be overstated, as was repeatedly conveyed to us in Europe. As one of our hosts from Europe, a subsidiary of France's national state-owned railway, said, "Everyone will get less than they wanted, but more than they expected."
Thank you. Mr. Roberts.
Good afternoon, Board. My name is Steve Roberts, and thank you for allowing me to address you. I'm here representing the Rail Passenger Association of California and its members who live in the San Joaquin Valley, East Bay, San Jose, and all throughout the Bay Area. We are, as an organization, we are a strong advocate for expanded public transportation, and as a result, RailPAC recommends that the High-Speed Rail Board go ahead and adopt Alternative 4 as the preferred alternative for the San Jose Merced line segment. In order to support strong economic growth in California, we need the additional transformative transportation capacity that this link will offer us. We can't, a no-build option is not an option. It's only an option for gridlock. So we must move ahead with this and link the Bay Area and the San Joaquin Valley. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Darnell. Wrong. Thank you, Mr. Roberts. And as Mr. Darnell is coming up, can I ask the next four to get in line, please? Mary Pizzo from San Jose, Danny Garza from San Jose, Patricia Gormley from San Jose, and Bill Rankin from San Jose. So, Mr. Darnell, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman, board members, Senator, Assembly member. My name is Harvey Darnell, and I am the former chairman of the Greater Gardner Strong Neighborhoods Initiative Coalition. I stand before you as I did in April 2010 to enlighten you on the harm an at-grade high-speed rail alignment will do to my neighborhood, which has had multiple major incursions over the last 85 years. This is the Mercury News coverage from that testimony, and you have a copy of that smaller version in front of you. And someone pointed out I'm wearing the same jacket. You also have the 18-page document that we presented to you, and I encourage you to peruse that before you make your vote today. That day, Chairman Pringle thanked our group for our polite and thought-provoking presentation, and the board subsequently withdrew our alignment at grade from consideration in 2011. In an effort to value engineer, it was reinstated as an alternative in 2013 under Governor Brown. I subsequently joined the San Jose Community Working Groups. There were 3 of them. I am the only San Jose member to have attended all the meetings of all three groups over the several years. I can tell you that at the last San Jose Community Working Group, only 2 members voted for Alternative 4. The rest of the members wanted hybrid alignments, which either bypass neighborhoods such as our 287 elevated alignment or had grade separations at all the crossings. I ask you to honor the City of San Jose Council request by fully developing and evaluating the alignment over 280 and 87. With an at-grade alignment through my neighborhood, there will be a loss of a part of Fuller Park, noise and vibration issues, environmental justice issues, and above all, safety issues at the grade crossings. Thank you so much and welcome to San Jose.
Thank you, Mr. Darnell. And for the record, I like your coat.
Thank you. And for the record, we support high-speed rail and
Thank
want
you.
to be successful.
Thank you. Ms. Pizzo.
Sorry, I need my notes. I'm sure it's fine. Apologize. Hi, my name is Mary Pizzo. I'm a resident of Gregory Plaza for 32 years, and I've been providing active feedback on this high-speed rail project for 1/3 of the time I've lived there. Again, I was attending the meetings, we were planning, we've been providing feedback. So as a result, when we see the staff preferred alignment, we're very discouraged because at grade, that plan being considered in totality from the station all the way down to Merced, negatively affects residents of Gregory Plaza, Gardner, Delmas, and the folks in the Azure crossing and along Monterey Highway. We currently have Union Pacific and Amtrak and Caltrain and the Capitol Corridor and the ACE train already coming through our neighborhood. Adding high-speed rail in my particular neighborhood will bisect the neighborhood once again, and in this case, closing one of 2 points to access our neighborhood, forcing the residents in and out of only one direction, forcing them to do U-turns to get back heading north, and forcing residents and pedestrians to have to cross under railroad tracks that are currently there in order to go to the neighborhood school and move forward to get to the Dearden station. The High-Speed Rail Board already approved our alternative alignment and the elevated track outside of the neighborhood. So disregarding your earlier work is disrespectful to your workers. It also destroys trust in voters and residents of these processes. So I'd like you to elevate your sites and consider this project of elevation throughout areas of the alignment where it makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Garza.
I have a bit of a TBI, so sometimes I don't read as well. Honorable Senator Jim Bell, Chair and Board. My name is Danny Garza. Here are a couple of the organizations I belong to. LULAC and MAPA are national organizations, and there are many others that I belong to. Right now I am representing Gardner. I'm also a member, but do not represent the State of California Department of Transportation Small Business Advisory Council as an alternate to Paul Guerrero from the Lighthouse Roundtable. I also am a city member with MAPA for DGS. I'm community driven. We do know our community better than high-speed rail. I'm here for Gardner because we feel we've been tricked. The alternate 4 is basically bait and switch. We approved as a community this project 10 years ago because of the beautiful picture that's not here that was there 10 years ago. That picture was a beautiful white suspension bridge going around our neighborhood and our school, protecting our children and our community. For high-speed rail to go around was the only reason we supported this project. Tracks through our neighborhood is a breach of trust. It seems that Federal Rail has withdrawn its dollars for the same reason. In closing, promises to communities now lead to abuse. This can be blended around Gardner. Time and time again, Gardner has been requesting this bypass, as everybody, even Boris, knows that we have been. Either a bridge or a viaduct is what is preferred. Please honor your original promise to go around our neighborhood. It's already been divided, as been stated. Please do not use our community to balance your bankroll. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garza. Ms. Gormley.
Good afternoon. I am Patricia Gormley and am part of the Greater Gardner Coalition. Why can't we learn some lessons from the Challenger Space Shuttle Morton Thiokol O-ring disaster? Why can't we learn from that? Politicians, technocrats, and value design cannot trump engineering reality. In 2010, the California High-Speed Rail Authority selected a preferred alignment south of Diridon Station using Interstate 280 and Highway 87, thus bypassing our high-density and socioeconomically diverse community. The damaging structural, safety, and quality of life impacts due to noise, vibration, fragile soils, and at-grade crossings made the tortuous rail through our neighborhoods, Gardner, Gregory Plaza, and North Willow Glen, a very bad choice. The rail speed limit of 35 miles per hour through that corridor contributed to the decision to bypass our neighborhood. This engineering reality has not changed in the last 9 years. So I urge you, I plead with you to reject the current high-speed rail authority's new preferred alignment through our community. The selection is not based on engineering reality, but on what a low ball budget can buy. Critical infrastructure on the cheap. Don't let your legacy become another Morton Thiokol moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gormley. As Mr. Rankin comes up, I'm going to call the next four as well. Please come up, Mr. Rankin. Ms. Turner, Abigail Ramsden, Edmund Sullivan, and Leslie, I think it's Wilf, I'm not sure. Apologies, Leslie. Mr. Rankin.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. My name is Bill Rankin. I'm a member of the Greater Gardner Neighborhood Advisory Coalition and have been since we presented to this board in 2010. I am a supporter of rail travel in San Jose, especially as we enter this new chapter of development in the Diridon area. This is a high-speed rail board meeting, which of course is your sole concern, but we as a neighborhood must deal with many more railroads than just high-speed rail. There's Caltrain, ACE, Amtrak, and Union Pacific, and if CMOF is moved south of Tamian, then the rail traffic through the area will increase exponentially. That is an unfair burden, and as you can see from our presentation, our neighborhoods have taken the brunt of the South Bay's transportation advances over the years. As we look to the future of our city's infrastructure, we need to look to the past. There have been monumental flubs in the South Bay when it comes to transportation infrastructure. Aiming the San Jose Airport towards the downtown core just a few miles away and not completing BART in the 60s are still being paid for in shorter buildings downtown and much higher costs to build BART. Please do not be the body that adds to that record by underestimating the impact of 150 plus trains per day at grade. The most successful high-speed rail systems in the world rarely have trains at grade. The elevated bypass over 280-87 is a better long-term engineering solution than the short-sighted decision to build a blended system between Tamian and Diridon. Build for the future of this exciting new development in the Diridon area. Join our mayor, local council members, and Supervisor Dave Cortese, who endorsed the 280-87 viaduct. Please re-examine your own decision in 2010 that recognized that the viaduct is a superior engineering solution. The cheapest option is rarely the best option. From the beginning, your message to the neighborhoods was that you wanted to do high-speed rail right. The viaduct will make for the best approach to Diridon and will serve the future San Jose well. Coming through at grade will not serve San Jose well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rankin. Ms. Turner.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Christina Turner, and I'm the city manager for the city of Morgan Hill. We're a small community. We're between Gilroy and San Jose, and we have about 45,000 residents. Our community has a beautiful and growing downtown with a Caltrain station. We applaud you as a board and as a staff, specifically Boris Lipkin, who's been great to work with, for addressing California's transportation crisis. The Morgan Hill City Council has asked that you place the high-speed rail project within the freeway right-of-way to avoid property impacts. While this continues to be Morgan Hill's preference, we want to provide you with comments on staff's recommended alignment. And our comments are on page 84 of the San Jose Merced section of your staff report. Morgan Hill supports electrification of the existing rail corridor through Morgan Hill. And thanks to the authority for working to secure the rights of the corridor from Union Pacific. We know that this investment is significant and that electrification will support the additional commuter rail service that the city has been requesting from Caltrain. As you move forward with the planning and development of the project, I want to highlight 3 specific areas. The first is public safety. This project has the potential to substantially change our community and impact public safety response times. You may not realize that our small community has 2 of the highest average daily trip rail crossings in the Caltrain corridor between San Francisco and Gilroy. We request that the authority work to ensure that public safety will not be compromised and consider long-term mitigations, including grade separations. Number 2, Caltrain station planning. We ask that the authority partner now with Caltrain VTA and us in master planning our station. And finally, number 3, community benefits. This project can connect communities by utilizing infrastructure for enhancements, including telecommunications and reclaimed water. We ask that you consider these opportunities in the design of the project. Thank you for continuing to work with the City of Morgan Hill.
Thank you. Ms. Ramsden.
Good afternoon. My name is Abigail Ramsden, and I work for the Nature Conservancy in California. I'm here to express my support for Alternative 4 and to reflect on a productive relationship that has been built between the Nature Conservancy, the Peninsula Open Space Trust, the Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority, and the Valley Habitat Agency. Over 2 years, we have worked together to share scientific data, wildlife studies, information on conservation investments and priorities in a specific area focused on Coyote Valley, the Pajaro River floodplain, the Pacheco Pass area, and Romero Ranch. Through this work, we have seen the mitigation hierarchy play out in that the design of Alternative 4 avoids impacts or minimizes them wherever feasible, and the design better supports our conservation objectives. These are concepts that we promote statewide through the use of tools like green prints and through investments in regional advanced mitigation programs. The result is that Alternative 4 minimizes impacts to wildlife corridors, it incorporates wildlife crossing designs, it supports agricultural operations, and is more sensitive to floodplains and river systems. This is an example of how conservation organizations and infrastructure agencies can work together collaboratively to solve problems. We are ready to engage at the next stage. Certainly we will review and comment on environmental documents. We will be focused on mitigation implementation in this key area, and we will hope to explore with the authority whether or not the regional conservation investment strategy might be a solution to mitigation needs. We'd like to conclude by thanking the staff the environmental team, the consultants, and everyone who worked with us over this 2-year period to come up with a great result for the environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ramsden. Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you. So I'm Edmund Sullivan. I'm the Executive Officer of the Santa Clara Valley Habitat Agency. We're implementing a federal habitat conservation plan and a state natural communities conservation plan within Santa Clara County. So all those areas that Abby mentioned are within our plan area. And I'd like to thank the authority, staff, and their consultant team for working closely with us and our conservation partners in trying to solve this complex problem of how to deal with environmental mitigation. So our focus is very narrow. It's wildlife connectivity within the county of Santa Clara. It's impacts to endangered species within the county. And it's also how the project will mitigate those impacts. Because we're implementing a 50-year permit, and part of what we have to do is buy land within Santa Clara County to mitigate impacts to projects that are seeking endangered species permits through CISA and the Federal Endangered Species Act. So working collaboratively with the authority on ensuring that the mitigation that the authority doesn't do is not in conflict with our habitat plan. And staff has been working with us diligently, your staff, to accomplish that. From our perspective, the authorities team has been thoughtful and responsive to our concerns. For our limited suite of issues related to wildlife connectivity and endangered species, Alternative 4 is not in conflict with our regional conservation goals. As Abby mentioned, we'll stay involved and stay engaged. I do hope that the authority can work through some of the issues that were brought up by Morgan Hill and San Jose related to at-grade crossings. Both those organizations are part of our organization. And again, I just want to thank the authority and staff for working with us to ensure a better design outcome.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. And as you're coming up, can I call the next 4 as well? Catherine Hickey, Scott Nyes, I believe, Gary Harris, and Giram Awoke.
Thank you. My name is Leslie Miles. Maybe
Hey,
I'm an
sorry.
architect. Maybe I should have been a doctor. Because
Sorry,
obviously I
my
didn't
fault.
write very clearly. So
Thank you, Ms. Miles.
I'm an architect and developer, and I was also a member of the community group in Morgan Hill. In 2003 and 2005, we developed a derelict granary into the center of a mixed-use project encompassing about a third of the downtown rail corridor. Our project received the California Redevelopment Agency Award of Excellence for Commercial Development in 2009. Additionally, the project was the 25th LEED certified building in the world and the 2nd LEED gold building in the world. The project was instrumental in the city of Morgan Hill getting a federal grant for redeveloping Depot Street. In addition to our $20 million project, which included not just commercial, office, retail, restaurant, but also residential, Morgan Hill currently has over $80 million currently in construction in the downtown, with a variety of mixed-use projects that clearly identify Morgan Hill as being on the cutting edge of transit-oriented development. And so in order to follow up with that and thinking through the process for the future, I'd really encourage you to come and visit Morgan Hill. It's really nice to be able to get out and look at a site and see what the impacts potentially could be. Because one of the real challenges that we have in Morgan Hill is that we do have 7 at-grade crossings. And those crossings could be impacted significantly by the number of trains. Right now we have a single track, but if we multiply that track by 3, it gives us the opportunity and the concern of having an potentially 46 minutes of stopping across the city with no ability to cross. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Miles. Ms. Hickey.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon.
So I'm Catherine Hickey. I'm Conservation Director with Point Blue Conservation Science. We're based in Petaluma, California. I'm also Hemispheric Council Chair of the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network, involving 20 countries across the Americas. Relevant to the San Jose to Merced project section, I'm here to communicate that this is not just a local issue or a California issue, but the outcome of this project is relevant internationally. The Grasslands Ecological Area in Merced County is one of the most important wetland sites in all of the Americas for biodiversity, especially wetland-dependent birds, including migratory shorebirds, which is my thing in particular. Shorebird populations are declining globally due to wetland conversion, degradation, and other threats. They're thought to be highly vulnerable to future projected changes in climate, issues on their Arctic breeding grounds, sea level rise, and also projected more severe droughts in interior regions like California's Central Valley. So clearly, conservation of the remaining and critically important wetlands for these species globally is high stakes for us. With the alternatives being considered for the high-speed rail through the Central Valley, we are seriously concerned about the integrity of the Grasslands Ecological Area Wetland Complex. Point Blue, along with other conservation and science NGOs, including Ducks Unlimited and Audubon, California, have been participating in a process with the high-speed rail staff to discuss alternatives to this particular portion of the route, including one below grade and one above grade shielded alternative. And I'm concerned that the alternatives we've discussed in that process have not been formally and sufficiently considered and presented for your deliberations. I'd like to reiterate the request that you will hear from Grassland Water District and Resource Conservation District that you conduct alternatives analysis that includes a below grade alternative, above grade, shielded alternative, or an alternative that avoids the GA altogether. Conduct impacts analysis for the state Volta and Los Banos wildlife areas, and if you
Go ahead, finish your sentence.
Okay. I just want to say that we can have cleaner transportation, preserve biodiversity, meet our public commitments, and support quality of life for our local and global communities. We just have to make that choice and invest in it. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, board members. Thank you again for being in San Jose for this important milestone decision that's going to move this crucial project forward for our state. Scott Neese, I'm the Executive Director of the San Jose Downtown Association. We represent 2,000 business and property owners in downtown San Jose. We've been working with your NorCal staff for many years on this. I think they would characterize us as the organization that's been consistently opposed to an aerial alignment through downtown San Jose. So we are here in support of Alternative 4 with two caveats. First, the station. Please continue your partnership, your productive partnership with the City of San Jose, Caltrain, VTA, and BART, making that work for the station. Certainly caught our eyes, your announcement earlier this week about the $400 million investment in Union Station. As we get a little bit further along here, we're looking forward to the same type of investment with the station here. Second caveat, and you've heard this from many others, is if you're going to do a corridor through the largest populated area in Northern California, then you're going to have to do this corridor impeccably. You're going to need to address the noise, the vibration. You're going to have to do the grade separations, the aesthetics. This is particularly crucial for the neighborhoods just south of downtown. You've heard from many of our frame area neighbors in Gardner, in North Willow Glen, but also through the Monterey corridor. There's some heavily traveled intersections there. So for it to work in San Jose, you need to do those two things to make your Alternative 4 sing. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Harris?
I'm not a very good speaker. I get nervous. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you about the high-speed rail going through the grasslands. The grasslands is Los Banos, California, the last largest remaining wetland in California, down a corridor known as Henry Miller Road. This corridor represents the middle of the grasslands, separating the north grasslands from the south grasslands. Ducks, geese, shorebirds, even animals use this corridor to go from the north habitat to the south habitat. It constructs If constructed, it'll be a barrier 20 to 30 feet, 40 feet high that will certainly constrict the natural flow of wildlife. The grasslands had been under siege before. When the Bureau of Reclamation built the Friant Dam and stopped the floodwaters from flooding the grasslands each year, the grasslands had to sue to make sure that we got our water. We did. When the Bureau of Reclamation built the San Luis Drain, they exported selenium and other chemicals leached out by irrigation techniques to the grasslands. Today we have several hundred acres of poisoned land that cannot be used for wildlife. So another assault on the grasslands is a California high-speed rail. What a waste of taxpayers' money and detrimental to the grasslands. Has any member of this board ever been to the grasslands?
Yes.
Have you? Thank you. That's it. Have you? Have you eaten the wool growers? That's good. Anyway, it's obvious what I'm saying. Thank you for letting me vent my frustrations, and I'll never vote for another boondoggle like this again. I used to take kids to the grasslands and have them sit in a circle and have them listen. What do you hear? Nothing. That's what they said. Nothing. That's good. Maybe a meadowlark, maybe a blackbird, but they heard nothing. It was quiet. Let's keep it that way. The grasslands is an important place to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. And as Mr. Awoke comes up, can I call the next four, please? Rick Ortega, Ellen Ware, John Sanders, and Adner, I believe, Levin, it's the last four. So thank you, Mr. Awoke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Groom Awoke. I'm the Public Works Director for the City of Gilroy, here representing our mayor and council members. We have submitted a letter, which is included in the packet, but I do have a copy and my contact information that I will share with the secretary afterwards. The City of Gilroy is in general in support of this project. Of the four alternatives presented, the city believes the preferred blended at-grade alignment within the existing UPRR right-of-way presents the least amount of impacts to property and businesses and will likely cause less disruption during construction. However, the city has some concerns as outlined below, and I'll just mention the highlights. Safety, flow of vehicular and pedestrian traffic across the rail right-of-way. This is of importance to the city of Gilroy. Another item is the fire station access and response times. The future number of trains in the corridor will cause an excessive amount of gate downtime. And how will this affect the fire department response? This is very important to us. So as part of the study, we would like the authority to make sure the fire department response times are satisfied and update our response cover study as needed. Historic buildings on the west side of the rail, this is also important for us. So as part of your future endeavor and study, we want to make sure that the authority minimizes the impact to historic properties. Related to impacts to private properties, we want to make sure that the authority makes the proper outreach and coordination with private properties. Downtown parking impacts. Gilroy is a major transportation hub, and this station will bring significant economic and social benefits, but at the same time, there will be concerns with parking in the downtown area. There's scarce parking in the downtown, so we want to make sure that there are some mitigation measures identified as part of the study. Traffic related on Leafsley Road in downtown, we want to make sure the authority considers alternative transportation mitigation measures as part of the future endeavor. I want to thank Boris and his team for their continued cooperation with our city. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Woke. And these are the last four comments that I have cards from for this section. So, Mr. Ortega.
Afternoon. Appreciate the opportunity. As you mentioned, my name is Rick Ortega. I'm the manager of the Grassland Water and Resource Conservation District and also oversee the Grassland Environmental Education Center located along the Henry Miller alignment. I'm also a concerned parent of a child just starting kindergarten at Volta Elementary, located just feet away from the proposed alignment and across the street from the Volta Wildlife Area. The staff report does not capture the concerns of many environmental agencies and lacks alternatives throughout the ecological area, especially where it becomes very proximal to the Volta Wildlife Area and the Los Banos Wildlife Area. My boards are disappointed that the preferred alternative contains no design detail on how the authority intends to mitigate impacts through the ecological area. California has lost 95% of its wetlands. The ecological area contains the largest remaining block of these wetlands and hosts millions of migratory waterfowl and shorebirds each year. Impacts to the GEA for the proposed alignment under 4A are certain and significant. The construction and operation of the high-speed rail through the GEA and adjacent to the state-owned wildlife areas is incompatible with the public trust uses for which these lands were initially acquired for by both the state of California and through its federal partnerships. California Department of Fish and Wildlife and others have asked for a Section 4F impacts analysis for the Volta and Los Banos wildlife areas, as well as the Grassland Environmental Education Center, which has not been completed. We formally request that the authority conduct an alternatives analysis that includes a below-grade alternative, an above-grade shielded alternative, and an alternative that avoids the GEA altogether. Also conduct a 4F impacts analysis for Volta and Los Banos wildlife areas and the Environmental Education Center. If you proceed with this alternative, the preferred alternative, adopt language in your resolution that was proposed by the Grassland Water District and the Resource Conservation Districts to make clear that you are not foregoing the need to address serious questions about the project design, impacts, and mitigation through the grasslands. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ortega. Ms. Ware?
Good afternoon, Ellen Weir, General Counsel for Grassland Water and Resource Conservation District. I have an ask at the end of this, so stick with me. You received comments from our organizations as well as wildlife agencies about their concerns with the lack of any alternative through the grassland ecological area. The only proposed alternative is an embankment with several very high viaducts over canals and wetland sloughs. Our GEA working group has requested the review of a below-ground alternative in this area, as well as an above-ground shield to prevent wildlife impacts, particularly bird impacts, noise impacts. Neither of the alternatives are presented to you today, despite the fact that there are similar design differentiations in the alternatives that are proposed west of Pacheco Pass. The authority's price estimate for the below-ground alternative through the GEA is well within the price variations for the 4 alternatives you're considering west of Pacheco Pass, and the below-grade alternative should have been analyzed. The authority continues to defer disclosing to us their cost estimate for an above-grade shielded alternative in the GEA, and without any details, we're concerned that the shield might not be long enough to protect state wildlife areas and permanent conservation easement lands. We specifically request that if you go forward with your decision today, you take our concerns and those of CDFW and the Fish and Wildlife Service submitted in our written comments into serious consideration. And we've asked, although it was not put forward in the staff report, that you include the following language in your NEPA and CEQA resolutions. First, quote, the authority continues to consult with affected entities and stakeholders in the grassland ecological area of Merced County. Identification of preferred alternatives in this segment is subject to further refinement and shall not impede the full and fair consideration and analysis of feasible project design and environmental mitigation measures to avoid or minimize ecological impacts in the GEA. Second, quote, the identification of a preferred alternative shall not limit the responsibility of the authority to conduct a thorough analysis and determination under Section 4F of the U.S. Department of Transportation Act regarding the potential for constructive use of state wildlife areas in the grassland ecological area. So we ask you to consider including that language in your resolution. We think it's a reasonable request at this juncture. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sanders?
Good afternoon, John Sanders, San Martin. Like other neighborhoods, we have concerns in San Martin with the high-speed rail preferred alternative 4 and its impact on community cohesion. Alternative 4 will disrupt and split communities like San Martin. There will be significant adverse impacts on traffic, pedestrians, noise, vibrations, impacts on emergency service response times. Like other communities, we need grade separations at major streets in San Martin, and this suggestion has been continually ignored by high-speed rail. As a result of all these considerations, preferred alternative 4 is the cheapest alternative for high-speed rail and the most expensive and disruptive alternative for the local communities it goes through. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, board members. My name is Adina Levin. With the Friends of Caltrain nonprofit supporting the successful modernization of Caltrain in the context of a regionally integrated transportation network. And with those goals, we do support the blended system, regarding which I have 2 points about this project section. The first is supporting what Teresa Alvarado of Spur had said, supporting the Diridon Integrated Station Concept Plan and the great collaboration that is in place between the various different agencies and the cities working on the DISC, and encourage high-speed rail to do, as has been stated in public at various meetings, to update its preferred alternative to take into account the good work in designing the best alternative as identified in the Diridon Integrated Station Concept Plan process. One. Point two is with regard to the blended system and electrification through to Gilroy. The Caltrain business plan analysis has suggested there is substantial additional ridership to be accrued, particularly in South San Jose, where there are underserved stations, and that electric service therefore would enable significant local additional ridership in addition to supporting the goals of high-speed rail. So I'd like to support that proposal as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do you have a card?
No, but I don't have to fill one in. I'd be happy to quote the relevant section
Yeah.
of
No, I know, Roland. Just want to make sure that you have it for the record. So afterwards.
Thank you. So the first thing I want to say is I really want to thank Mr. Roy Hill, without whom none of this would ever have happened. Roy Hill was instrumental in actually getting this alternative in the 2018 business plan. We had 10 years of absolute nonsense of Parsons-Brinckerhoff prior to that. So I want to recognize him. But now we have alternative 4, which is basically what the proposal was. But now the devil is in the detail. It's how we're going to make it work. And you've seen some slides that are showing one track with Union Pacific, non-electrified, and 2 electrified tracks next to it. And now start thinking, how you're going to do in grade separation? How can you possibly design a downtown Morgan Hill station with that kind of track configuration? So my advice to you moving forward is reach out to your early train operator, Deutsche Bahn. And it will explain to you how in Germany, high-speed rail, intercity rail, commuter rail, and freight all share the same tracks. They don't need dedicated tracks for freight. So that's my advice for you right now. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we have no more public comment on item number 3. What I'd like to do is, Boris, if you would come back up and open it up for the board for any questions or comments. And can I, if it's okay as a board's privilege, can I ask you a couple of them to begin with? So we clearly heard from both the public commentary and your community outreach a concern, a very fair concern for communities throughout the Caltrain corridor about grade crossings. And just while we can't assume all of the costs associated with those independently, what can we do with, in collaboration with other transit partners, Caltrain, VTA, et cetera, to help address this important concern as voiced by the community?
Yeah, I think the comments that you heard about grade crossings are not a huge surprise. This is a conversation that's been ongoing in the region for a number of years now with cities up and down the peninsula, and you'll hear, I think, more about this in the San Francisco-San Jose project section, the rest of the Caltrain corridor, really taking a hard look at what are some options for grade separations. Of course, we've been a part of some of that, including in San Mateo, where we're a partner in that grade separation project. It's also been something that I think has been an important component of the DISC process, where we've been in a partnership with Caltrain and VTA in the city that is looking at a couple of those grade crossings. And similarly, we're working on setting up a similar partnership in southern San Jose for a San Jose rail corridor plan that would look at the 3 grade crossings in the Monterey corridor in a similar way. As I think you mentioned, Chairman, I don't see us being able to take on the burden of the 70 grade crossings between San Francisco and San Jose by ourselves. But it does seem like there's an opportunity, and how these things have really happened over time and these projects taken shape is by strong partnerships between local entities, regional entities, and of course the state and sometimes even the federal government being engaged and involved. And so it seems like that's a relevant example for us to continue to follow as we engage in the region and we look at how those things can come together and that we can be a part of. And at the table, certainly with the other agencies that would be engaged as well.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple of other questions, and I'm going to open it up to others. One is, what are the design considerations can we review for the concerns that were expressed extensively about issues in the grasslands ecological area?
Sure. I think you heard some of the discussion. The analysis of routes between the Bay Area and the Central Valley has been a very long-standing process going back to even the 1990s and really kind of in the NEPA and CEQA context since about 2001. Over that time, we've looked at over 15 different route options going in, around, through, and avoiding the GA altogether. We've consulted with many of the stakeholders, with FRA and other agencies along the way. After all of that analysis, kind of how we landed here was after consultation with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers as well as the U.S. EPA, who agreed with us that this was the best option of studying one route through the GEA after the extensive analysis that had been done to that point, because all the other options had higher levels of impacts. At the same time, we've been looking at how do we reduce some of those impacts as we refine the route and the design, as well as how do we mitigate the remaining impacts. And so we've looked at those underground options. We're also studying that enclosure that was discussed, and it's something that we're going to be coming back to some of the stakeholders in this area with our analysis of that in the coming months. And of course, there'll be a lot more about those mitigation options and a conversation that will continue as we get to the draft environmental document stage. As we talked about from the very beginning, identifying a preferred alternative does not cut off that conversation by any means. It's a step that enables us to continue to move forward in those discussions. And I think this conversation just redoubles the need to continue to engage in this part of the corridor as we do with the rest of the more urbanized area between San Jose and Gilroy as well.
Okay, so we will be having more extensive conversations through the review process of what those look
Definitely.
like. Yes. Okay, then let me ask you one last question around, it's related, is what commitment has the authority made to habitat protection in the San Jose to Merced segment and land conservation, et cetera?
Yeah, this has been an important part of the development process in this project section. One of the kind of key commitments that was made in the programmatic EIS, along with going on a viaduct through the GA, was 10,000 acres of conserved lands that we would endeavor to bring about as part of mitigation for our impacts in this area. And those are things that we'll be working with Mark and his team on the environmental side to identify proper sites and options for that mitigation. And if you want more detail than that, I'm happy to bring up some of our project managers that can give you the next set of detail beyond that.
I think that's good for now. So why don't open it up to other questions or comments from other board members?
Lenny, Mr. Chairman, this is Lynn. I just wanted to say my question was about the grassland, so you got the answer for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I can't see your hand being raised, so thank you for saying it.
Just in this process, if we select the preferred alternative, does that mean that no other alternatives will be looked at in the document?
No, I think that's an important point, and thank you for that question. All of the alternatives that the 4 alternatives in this project section will be looked at in full in the draft EIR. As I mentioned, right now we're just focused on those differentiating elements and trying to give people a sense of kind of what our focus might be, and so that they can focus their comments as they look at the draft EIR of where we might be headed. But this is not a final decision. Nothing gets left off the table at this stage in the process. So.
Thank you for that. And then secondly, on the partnership on grade separations, you're talking about a design and funding partnership. Is that correct?
I think what the roles are can vary in different places. Certainly we have been in San Mateo, for example, primarily a funding partner with some input into design, but less so than where we might be coming in from an earlier stage and be
Right.
a more part of how the design comes about. We already have kind of lots of knowledge about the various grade crossings, and some of the design work that's been done, for example, for Alternative 2 might be relevant to some of that. So those will probably depend on the exact location and where plans are at and what our role might be.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes. Bonnie.
Boris, thank you. And thank you to everyone in the public that took the time to come and very carefully express your concerns, your challenges to high-speed rail. It was very, very important. And Boris, I just wonder how you're going to follow up on all of the comments that were made today.
Sure. I think some of the particular feedback that we've heard are areas that we want to make sure that we study as we get into those draft environmental documents. Many of the members of the public that you've heard have engaged with us previously and are either part of our community working groups or maybe technical working groups and others that we have regular interactions with. Of course, when we release the draft EIR EIS, at that point we will have both another series of open houses, just like we did on the way to this stage, as well as a public hearing. And then the other thing that I would say is, our staff is constantly engaged with communities along the route and are available for any of those discussions outside of maybe formal meetings, whether there's particular areas of one-on-one interaction that we need to have, that we've been doing that over time and are happy to continue to do that. Our office is here in San Jose, and we do travel up and down the corridor, and so we're happy to come to and engage with folks where they are as well.
So everyone here knows how to get in touch with Boris, right? Is that right? I'm assuming. Well, thank you for that. I can't think of anything more important. This is a public process. There's nothing worse than being ignored, and we want to try to avoid that. So I really appreciate your doing all the follow-up and doing the work. All I can think of is we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and we're struggling along here. This isn't the end. It's part of the process, and it sounds like there will be many opportunities to refine Alternative 4 as you move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, and I appreciate you being here in my community, where especially my board chambers, which I served for 12 years in this room. So it's kind of homecoming for me, and I also want to congratulate Henry for being here. And Henry served with me when he was on the Board of Supervisors in Fresno on the CSAC board, and I was his son's seatmate in the assembly. So the family is well known, as well as Joaquin's dad, who served with me in the assembly, as well as Bonnie Lowenthal. So a lot of these people are familiar with me in terms of working, and I'm sure they're going to listen and be concerned about everybody's concerns. I'm a longtime supporter of this project. I think it's very important to bring high-speed rail to the Bay Area and to San Jose. We all know this is a very large project, a mega project, in fact, and we will encounter all the challenges as we go through this, moving forward from the Central Valley to San Jose and the Bay Area, and creating in this part about 3,000 additional jobs, and there's been 3,000 jobs in the Central Valley. So in our area, it's going to create a large number of jobs. I have things that I've heard from my constituency, which encompasses most of the high-speed rail area here in this community, and I want to kind of talk about it just a bit, very shortly. I'm not going to take too much time, but first of all, the Diridon Station, The BART project is coming to the Dearnon Station relatively quickly. And we are going to have the BART project, right now we're essentially about 80% funded for the BART down to the Dearnon Station and up to Santa Clara. So that project is on its way to be funded. Recently, we achieved Governor Brown last year and put in the budget $730 million for the BART to San Jose project, coming from SB1, which I was pleased to be the author of. And we also got $375 million for the BART to San Jose project from the toll bridge increase that was approved by the voters in the Bay Area, which I also authored. So those are the two, you know, we got a lot of money. We also put $100 million of toll bridge funds into the Dearnon Station project specifically. So we're investing a lot of money by increasing the level to above 80% of the total funding. We are now eligible for the federal government FTA expedited project delivery funding. And just a few weeks ago, the BART to San Jose was awarded the engineering money of $125 million under that expedited project delivery system, which is the first expedited project approved by the federal government, in fact. So we got the $125 million for the expedited delivery for the BART to San Jose. I'm saying this because the Dearnon Station is part of that project, and I hope that the high-speed rail continues to work with the planning for the multimodal station there. So we essentially, you know, we want to keep the construction simple, and we want to build it all at once. We don't want to have multiple phases, like we finished the BART part of the station and then, you know, some other part, and maybe later the high-speed rail part. We want it all built together at once. Okay, so that's the first thing I want to say. I think there's got to be some planning and thinking in terms of that station about how to expedite it. We're putting a lot of dough into that station, and we expect that station will be built all at once rather than hopefully in phases. Will not be desirable. We want it to be built at once. So I wanted to say that, and that's one of the most important things. The Gardner neighborhood issues, I think we have to spend a little time on that and work out the details. Those are things we have to address. The environmental, social environmental impacts of that neighborhood needs to be addressed. And I'm going to be working with everybody on that. I'm very familiar with that neighborhood. Actually, when I was a young man, I used to go to a Virginia and Bird Street and get on a flatbed truck and go out and pick tomatoes. So it goes back to when I was 13 years old, and I first got my work permit for picking tomatoes in San Jose from the Gardner neighborhood. And a lot of the people that were on that flatbed truck were Gardner. I don't know if some of you were in that neighborhood then, but that's when I first got to know a lot about the Gardner neighborhood. And it's turned into a vibrant, wonderful, active community. And they've worked so hard over the last 20 years for that. We just want to keep it, you know, that way, because they worked real hard over the last 20 years. And it's more of a kind of a, I would say it's a spiritual thing that we have to protect. The fact that they worked so hard to build up their community from, it had a lot of problems, and they've been building and building and building, and they've done such a great job on that. And it's hard to understand that when you sit here at a meeting and just don't get the flavor for that from people. But this is a neighborhood that's really worked very, very hard to build up their community. And so we have to respect that, I think. And lastly, I think, Mr. Chairman and members, Probably one of the most important things we need to do is electrify Caltrain down to Gilroy. I think that is very important, and I want to see the Union Pacific come to the table and work this out, because I think electrifying the Caltrain to Gilroy and doing the rail upgrades on the corridor is going to be so important, so we can have complete Caltrain services down to Gilroy. And I'll throw another thing on the table that hasn't been brought up ever. Why not have a bus bridge from Merced to Gilroy so that people can go from Merced, Los Banos? It looks like it's going to be an interim kind of situation here in terms of the construction, you know, but why not have a bus bridge, an express bus that comes through that corridor to get people to Gilroy, and then they can catch the electrified trains going up to San Jose, San Francisco, and so forth. Because I think the idea of having some kind of interregional connection, I think will be something that we ought to think about as an answer for people that want to see that connection right now. It's absolutely a horrible situation right now, that Pacheco Pass. We need to remedy the situation. I know that the transportation highway funds are being looked at to fund that project and build it up. It's going to happen, but we need to have some transit approaches. Like we have a similar bus going from Santa Cruz to San Jose to the Amtrak station. And I think we ought to look at these kind of ideas. So I thank you for being here. I'm going to be working this next year, of course, on financing options that will help do all these things we're talking about. We did SB1, we had SB9 that allowed multi-year funding. I think the high-speed rail needs to have some kind of multi-year funding legislation to complete the projects. We have SB5 on the governor's desk. SB5 will help fund some of these ideas we have around Gilroy and the Dearborn Station for transit-oriented development infrastructure projects around transit stations. So SB5 is on the governor's desk. We have widespread support for that. We also passed a bill last week on infrastructure financing district. It's now on the governor's desk in terms of the budget. It's a budget bill that was put on the governor's desk to expedite infrastructure financing districts. So I think we have some new financing ideas. So in conclusion, when this comes back in the spring, it's time to come back at the same time the business plan is going to come back, because we're in the 2-year cycle on the business plan. This is going to be a business plan item to talk about financing, how do we pay for things. And when the business plan comes back, I think that's the time we kind of can propose some of these financing things to help deal with some of these things like the electrification, the Dearborn Station. They can do multi-year funding. The Gardner neighborhood issues, some of the interchange overpasses that are talked about here. Those kinds of things could be dealt with in that way. And I think it's a reasonable thing to look at. And I hope that you will consider some of these concerns that I'm raising. I will continue to raise these issues in terms of my overall effort to finance infrastructure in California. We've gone a long way in terms of infrastructure financing over the last 2 or 3 years. We've achieved great things with SB1 and the other bills that we've done. We continually are going to be searching for other answers to how to finance infrastructure in California. I'll continue to work with you on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Other comments from board members? Mr. Perea.
Yeah, it seems like we've been talking about three flashpoints in this alignment. Do you have any aerials of those that we could visually see the neighborhood, the Morgan Hill, and then the wetlands, what we're talking about?
I don't know that I have more detailed maps than the ones that we showed in the presentation here, but we do have lots more. We have detailed plans and things like that I'd be happy to.
Okay.
If you would like
Yeah, the
to
maps
follow
are
up
good,
with you.
but sometimes it'd be good if we could have an aerial, so we could. I'd like to see this neighborhood.
Yeah, we've at our open houses and community engagements, we have had all those different plans as well as opportunities for folks to sit down at a computer, type in their address, for example, and see what it.
No, understood. I'm sorry. I'm talking about for us as board members.
I
If you
understand.
had something up there, we could take a look and say, okay, this is what
Right.
these folks are talking about.
I don't have that with me.
Okay.
I would be happy to follow up with you if you'd like me to share those with you in detail. We can go through
Okay.
them together.
But as we've all said, this is the beginning of a process. There's going to be a lot of discussion. And Senator Bell, I hear that, and I'm glad to hear you're going to be working a lot on the issues that are in this area. The only other question I have is on page 38, the San Jose to Merced timeline. And it was good to be at the previous meeting because I was hearing that there's a lot of critical paths that are in place, and this is, I know, very broad. But one of my big concerns or issues moving forward is making sure that there's little to no slippage in our projects, which means, understood, there's sometimes things are going to happen that we just are not expecting, but the worst thing that could happen is have slippage because there was lack of communication internally or with our contractors. So what I'm asking is, where can I find a more detailed timeline, critical path after today moving forward so that we can ensure as a board, as time is going, that there's no slippage?
Sure. I think in your F&A reports from the Finance and Audit Committee, there's a schedule for the environmental documents that shows the progress along each of the milestones in that. We do have additional detail that we use to manage the projects on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis that we can go into that level of detail of what the production schedules are or more of a dashboard basis.
Okay.
If you'd like to see that. This has been we're very much aligned with you in terms of the need to continue to move forward. What I might say is that when I stepped into this role about 18 months ago, our goal was at that time to bring the preferred alternatives to the board in September of 2019, and here we are 18 months later bringing the preferred alternatives to you. We do have a couple months that we might be slipping, as I think Joe mentioned at F&A, but we are, these schedules are really important to us. We review these on a weekly basis from a management standpoint, on a monthly basis through our confidence meetings, and there's lots and lots of discussions of how we stay on track and what are the pending issues, how do we get those resolved so we can continue to move forward.
And we're looking to complete and certify the EIR for this segment, winter, spring 2021?
Correct.
Okay, now how close of a date, refined date, do you have to that?
So the reason that it's a little bit vague here is because I know we're coming back in next month to the board with more specific dates. We usually have a month that we present, and I didn't want to get ahead of that presentation next month, so we will be locking that down and then managing to that after.
Okay, and you're the director in this area?
So I'm yes, for Northern California.
Okay, so you would be the one that would be accountable for making sure that this timeline is met?
So our internal structure has, I don't want to get into the details, but yes, our Northern California team is accountable for the delivery of these documents.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Boris, first of all, for you and your team and the CEO, you've done a terrific job of putting this all together. And we know that there's no perfect solution on an alignment that's going to universally impact everybody equally or be acceptable to everyone equally. There are some things in here, and I'm very concerned about the comments with regards to gardeners in the grasslands, comments of Morgan Hill and splitting their downtown area. I'm very concerned about safety, and whether it's at 110 miles an hour or 79 miles an hour or whatever it might be, or 220 miles an hour. One of the things that I think we've done successfully is we talked about grade separation, and it seems to me a lot of the things I'm hearing here will be helped to be mitigated by that, and I would strongly encourage that staff considers that and doesn't set that aside necessarily. Secondly, I'm concerned about the use agreement with Union Pacific. So much of what we are doing is relying upon that, so I'm sure that that's foremost in your thoughts also, and ensuring that the viability of the alignment is based upon that agreement. I'm interested to some extent by the language that was suggested, I think, by Ms. Ware. I don't know what the implications of something like that might be, and I'm not sure because I haven't seen it in writing whether or not it's appropriate, Tom. But
Mr. Vice Chair, the alternative already speaks to the in the whereas as to our continuing obligation to refine these. That on page 9, I think, of the letter is a suggested additional language, and I don't see any legal barrier to adding that to the resolution.
are there any pitfalls in adding it?
No.
Well, I want to, the second part of that statement, I would say we wouldn't, the second sentence, maybe it was. I mean, I know that I think that we're very concerned about this issue. All of us on this board that have spoken have expressed that, but I don't want to tie us into a particular analysis that is maybe not beneficial, because we don't really know, at least I don't know the Section 4F of the U.S. I mean, but I do want to say that I think that we should tell staff in our motion kind of the areas that we would like them to address.
Sure, absolutely. You can direct staff as to what areas you'd like more scrutiny on that were raised as concerns in the public comment period. And then also, the resolution has a series of whereases, and one of them is the identification of preferred at this time is not an implementation of the decision by the board, and full consideration of all the effects of the alternatives will be considered in the ongoing environmental process. And that is part of the resolution, so I think that also covers the obligation of the authority and for staff to continue with this process.
Okay.
And to consider all mitigations that we can possibly incorporate with regards to the grasslands.
Mr. Chairman, just had one quick question. The counsel for one of the organizations had asked that we consider adding some language to the resolution. Is anybody opposed to that?
Well, it's when you look at an environmental document, you look at feasible mitigation. You don't look at all possible mitigation, because you're really constricted by the law and by your project, So that kind of language, I would say we just need to steer clear of, but understanding that we want to look at the feasible mitigation measures.
Okay, can we hold on that question until we have a motion just in the specifics? But were you finished, Tom, or do you have other things?
Well, I appreciate both of the comments here. I think it focuses on what I was thinking also, but I am concerned about the language, but I'm concerned about the process from this point forward. The process being that this isn't a conclusion today, but this is the beginning of the work assignment that you all will be working on for the next 18 months or so. But to ensure that these things are all incorporated in what you're going to be looking at, so that that there's certainly enough concern by the people who have raised these comments, and probably from us sitting here listening also, that we need to address appropriately and respectively or respectfully whatever we can do to mitigate the impacts of this alignment on those people who are being affected, as well as those who are not. So I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Renee, did you have anything? Anyone else? Okay, if we have no more comments or questions, thank you very much. I'd just like also express my gratitude. I know this is a lot of work, and the fact that you've had this much engagement is encouraging. The fact that there was this much engagement today is part of why we have a public process, and I think we've heard loud and clearly from both the public and all of the board members who spoke and how important that is going forward. So appreciate your openness and engagement with everyone. I appreciate all the public commentary on this, and you have my commitment as an ongoing basis that we will continue to have that kind of open and ongoing dialogue to make sure that we're addressing the concerns that were raised today. So with that, I will accept a motion. We actually need to do 2 votes on this. One, concur with alternative 4 for CEQA as the preferred alternative, and then a second vote for concurring with alternative 4 as the NEPA preferred alternative.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Can I add a couple of caveats to that motion, just in line of what we've been talking about today, which is that we are concerned about mainly 3 things, which is the coordination of the Diridon Station planning, that be part of, I mean, I know it will be part of your analysis, but it's something that we heard. The Gardner neighborhood and some of the other neighborhoods where overcrossings or grade separations were of particular concern. And the third was the grasslands issue, that we look at that, and particularly in terms of feasible mitigation.
Okay, so I take that as a friendly amendment, Tom, for both of them with a particular focus on those 3 issues?
Yeah, and we discussed Gardner, Morgan Hill, San Jose, with those 3 specifically I heard during the testimony.
Okay, those would be covered in the categories of grade separations?
Yes.
Okay, so I have a motion, a second. Are there any other comments? Okay, then we'll call the vote. Please do the roll.
Director Schenk. Director Schenk.
Why don't we come back to her? She may have stepped.
Yes.
Okay,
Sorry,
thank
I
you.
was on mute, yes.
Vice Chair Richards.
Yes.
Director Curtin.
Yes.
Director Lowenthal.
Yes.
Director Camacho.
Yes.
Director Miller.
Yes.
Chairman Donza. Chairman Donza.
Yes.
Director Perea.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you, everyone. To be clear, those were Resolution 1905 and 1906 for CEQA and NEPA as amended. Oh, now, sorry, that was 1905. We now need to do 1906. So can you take the roll for that one? Is that clear? The one we just voted on was the CEQA one. We're going to do now the NEPA one. Okay, 1906.
Director Schenk. Director Schenk. Vice Chair. Yes. Vice Chair Richards.
Yes.
Director Curtin.
Yes.
Director Lowenthal. Yes. Director Camacho.
Yes.
Director Miller.
Yes.
Chairman Donson.
Yes.
Director Perea.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Right,
You
so
don't get rid of me this easy.
we're
It's
not going to
one
get
more.
rid of you. We're going to, at the pleasure of the board, just keep rolling on this. If anyone needs to take a rolling break, please go ahead and do that. But let me go, thank you, everyone, on item number 3. We'll now move on to item number 4.
Okay, so this should be now a familiar drill. This is the staff recommendation for the preferred alternative from San Francisco to San Jose. And so this is agenda item number 4 for today. Just as our recommendation in San Jose to Merced, we're asking for the board's concurrence to identify alternative A as the preferred alternative in the San Francisco to San Jose draft EIR-EIS. Similar setup where this is not a final decision. This is setting us up for the draft environmental documents. The final approval comes at the end of the process. We will study both alternatives through the draft and into the final documents as well. Same approach in terms of how we got to this stage. The kind of key difference between this project section and the rest of the statewide system is in this corridor we have very specific legislation that limits the options that we can look at. In 2012, as part of a agreement, and in some ways in reaction to what we had proposed previously, which was a fully dedicated route between San Francisco and San Jose, we reached agreement with Caltrain and in the region to, instead of building a whole new high-speed rail infrastructure along the Caltrain corridor, to instead use a blended system, so sharing the tracks with Caltrain, electrifying that corridor, and having that move forward as a foundational piece while we would continue to study what's needed for high-speed rail on top of that. That agreement was codified in legislation that directs us to have a primarily two-track system, primarily within the existing rail corridor. And so when we look at alternatives, it's really looking at what is that incremental high-speed rail infrastructure that's needed on top of what Caltrain has already approved and is in the middle of constructing today. Similarly, we have actively engaged with the communities along the route. The one thing that I'll mention is especially focused on this project section is we've had the benefit of the CSCG and LPMG, which are the city, county, staff coordinating group, and the local policymaker group, which are made up of representatives from each of the towns and cities along the route all the way from San Francisco to Gilroy. They have monthly meetings. We have a standing agenda item along with Caltrain to really engage with each community, and that's really helped us get input from everybody along the way here, as well as, of course, extensive outreach and engagement with our community technical working groups and others throughout the process. In this corridor, we've also been working with our agency partners, obviously Caltrain being the absolute primary one for the importance of making sure that the blended system works and that our plans are properly aligned. So when we get to the range of alternatives, this is the existing Caltrain corridor. For this project section, we're really looking at the area from 4th and King Station in San Francisco as a temporary terminal for us. While if the connection to Salesforce Transit Center isn't completed, that's a project that has been environmentally cleared by the TJPA, so it's already got a record of decision. And so we're looking at a temporary terminus in San Francisco, going down the corridor all the way to Scott Boulevard, which is the end of the project section, or sorry, the end of the preferred alternative recommendation, because that's where San Jose to Merced takes over. And so in the draft EIR, you'll have the project section going all the way through Diridon Station, but for this purposes, you already gave us direction on the preferred alternative from Scott Boulevard south. The two key differentiating factors in this project section are the location of the light maintenance facility. So in alternative A, it's located on the east side of the tracks in Brisbane. In alternative B, it's located on the west side of the tracks. And then the other differentiating factor in this project section is in alternative A, we do not have a passing track in the middle of the corridor. In alternative B, we have a 6-mile stretch of passing track between San Mateo and Redwood City. As I mentioned, the other elements are common elements between the two alternatives that do not differentiate them, but just to give you a sense of what that looks like. We're talking about upgrading the corridor and modernizing it to be able to operate at speeds up to 110 miles an hour. For purposes of all of our analysis, we've assumed the level of service that Caltrain has previously approved, which is the 6 trains an hour that they cleared as part of their environmental process, and then adding the up to 4 high-speed trains an hour that would be phased in over time as service ramps up. We also have a number of other safety improvements that we want to make along the corridor, including modifications at the 2 holdouts rule stations at Broadway and Atherton that would be make them standard stations that would be able to have eastbound, north and southbound trains there at the same time. That's not an option today, as well as safety modifications at all of the at-grade crossings to modernize those. So some of the key components of that are the quad gates, so having gates at all 4 parts of the intersection, the channelization that would make sure that cars can't swerve around the gates and get into the corridor. And then there's already a lot of right-of-way fencing that's been built over the last 5 or 10 years here, but where there's gaps, we would fill in those gaps to make sure that the entire corridor is fenced and trying to, as much as we can, keep everybody off of the tracks as trains are going by. On those 2 key differentiating factors of passing tracks and the light maintenance facility, just to give you a little bit of the history, The process of looking at passing tracks and passing track options has been a joint effort with Caltrain basically since the day that, or even before, that the blended system was adopted in 2012. And so over the years, we've looked at a variety of different options. This ties into sort of key assumptions around a balance between infrastructure, service planning and the variety of service plans that you might want to run, as well as the performance of the signaling system and how close together trains can be. And so after all of that work, we narrowed down to alternative A and B. So that's after looking at many different options, that's the short middle 4, that's the 6-mile passing track in alternative B, and then the no passing track alternative. As I think I mentioned briefly in San Jose to Merced, Caltrain has undertaken a planning exercise to develop a long-range vision for what their service might look like over time and looking at growth above and beyond high-speed rail. And so as part of that process, they've picked up some of our work that's gotten us to kind of what is the needed infrastructure for high-speed rail and looked at, okay, what is the increment above that and what are some of the potential passing tracks that might be necessary at that stage. That goes beyond our work here, and that will require future environmental clearance and other work. But that's something that we continue to engage with our partners with in doing that analysis. Focusing in on the passing tracks, as I mentioned, they stretch from San Mateo to Redwood City and Alternative B. One of the other kind of key things that happens to be able to build those passing tracks is we would have to relocate the San Carlos Caltrain station about 2,000 feet to the south. And so that's one of the kind of key distinguishing features there. And the light maintenance facility, while we are studying the 2 options in Brisbane, these are not the only sites that we've looked at over the years. Just to give you 2 of the other ones that we studied in more detail were at the Port of San Francisco as well as the San Francisco International Airport. Those sites both had particular issues that made them infeasible, whether there was already planned development on the site that we needed to be able to put our facility, or additional environmental or community impacts, such as with the Port of San Francisco having to rebuild a part of Highway 280 and then close off one of the key on-ramps onto that road. Some big issues. What we've narrowed down to is alternatives A and B, which are the 2 sites in Brisbane on the Baylands site. I'll talk a little bit more about the trade-offs between them, but this is sort of meant to give you the rough layout of those facilities. And I know, Board Member Pereira, you asked about an aerial. I do have one here for you, and so I got one. So, I know you've seen kind of this setup, and it's very similar to San Jose to Merced. This is the full range of things that we're going to study in the draft EIR. The differentiating factors are a much narrower set because we're really focused on those 2 key features that we are differentiating. And so the analysis becomes, frankly, a little bit simpler than what we had in San Jose to Merced, which had all that variation between 4 different alternatives and mix of routes. We're still looking at finding the balance between the various factors, and we've identified the ones that kind of go into each of the buckets of system performance, environmental, and community factors. Similar to San Jose to Merced, in your board memo, there's numbers for all the things that I'm about to share as sort of the roll-up of all of that analysis, so you can see the detail behind it, and of course the staff report gets into the next level of detail as well. But to cut to the chase, the staff is recommending alternative A, which is the East Brisbane Light Maintenance Facility and the no passing track option in that alternative. And I'll kind of cover the basis for this recommendation as well. On the system performance characteristics, what we see is that with the passing track option, it would give us a slightly faster travel time for high-speed rail, so we would save a couple of minutes during a average peak hour trip. Caltrain would be a couple of minutes slower, but what we've been able to prove out in working with Caltrain is that from a capacity standpoint, there's enough capacity to operate an efficient blended system without the passing track. And so while there's a little bit of trade-off in travel time, it's not a significant difference. Across the many community factors, obviously building 6 miles of infrastructure in a densely populated area would have a variety of community factors that go with alternative B, and so everything from residential and commercial displacements, there's things built that are right up against the corridor, and so we would be having substantial impacts there with the passing tracks, as well as the kind of key consideration from a land use perspective in Brisbane has been that the city on its ballot in 2018 approved a general plan amendment to allow development on that Baylands site. The approval that the voters gave put a mixture of mixed use and housing development on the northwest corner of the site, and then commercial open space and other development on the rest of it. And so alternative B would put the light maintenance facility both would have a larger impact to that planned residential and mixed use development, as well as putting the light maintenance facility closer to where there will be homes in the future. And so from a land use perspective and compatibility with those plans, there's an advantage to putting it on the east side of the site. From an environmental standpoint, these two differentiators are completely focused on the light maintenance facility, where we have more wetlands on the west side, and that's something that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has a big say in terms of wetland impacts, as well as wildlife habitat that's part of Ice House Hill, which is has endangered species on the west side of the tracks, and so the light maintenance facility on the east side has lower environmental impacts there. And then the other thing just to note in terms of the alignment between our plans and Caltrain, and again, this is sort of another one of those policy considerations. As I mentioned, Caltrain has been looking at various service visions for their future. What they've looked at as their baseline scenario has been effectively the same thing as what we've looked at as part of our EIR EIS, which does not include the passing track. As they look at future service growth, they've identified some passing sidings and things that they would need as that service ramps up, but those are different than the passing track option that we have in alternative B. And so by pursuing alternative A, all of those things become incremental to what we're planning and the infrastructure that we're proposing here, whereas in alternative B, those would have some potential conflicts between their plans and our plans as those advance going forward. So to kind of roll all of that up, what we see is a marginal trade-off of a little bit more travel time, but by not having the passing track. We see fewer displacements and impacts to natural resources and wetlands, lower capital costs from not having to build that infrastructure, and then better alignment with our partners at Caltrain. So just as in San Jose to Merced, we have been out all over the region and conducting a similar outreach effort to make sure that we have feedback to give you. And just as in the other project section, we do have a full report, and I'm sure that there will be members of the public who will be able to articulate their views as well directly. Just to kind of go through some of the key themes and a snapshot of everything that we've heard along the way. When it comes to the passing tracks, we sort of heard the balance of two things. From those communities through which the passing tracks would run, we heard support for alternative A because it reduces those impacts that the passing track would have if it was built. At the same time, many of our engagements, what we heard was the desire for improved service and operating speeds, both for us and for Caltrain, and making sure that those higher service levels and that might be needed in the future were something that we continue to be part of and planning for with our partners. And that might involve different passing tracks, and as I mentioned, than what we have in alternative B. We heard concerns from both the city and the developer, the property owner in Brisbane, about the location of the light maintenance facility and its potential impact on their proposed development there. We have and will continue to engage with both the developer in terms of how we can have design compatibility between their plans and ours, as well as with the city to alleviate some of their concerns. There's also, in this corridor, as you can imagine, lots of questions about our coordination with Caltrain, as well as other things going on in the region, such as the downtown extension in San Francisco. We were very grateful. Caltrain actually had a staff member at all of our open houses, and so we were able to direct them to them to hear kind of both sides of that story. as well as San Francisco had representatives in our San Francisco open house speaking to some of the city's projects there. As you heard in San Jose to Merced, grade separations and grade crossings are similarly issues in San Francisco to San Jose. And then the sort of new thing that's come out in our outreach more recently has been interest from communities, especially in southern part of San Francisco, about workforce development opportunities with the light maintenance facility in terms of both the construction as well as the future operations of that facility. At our community working groups, we had a lot of discussion about those passing tracks and how do we plan for the growth that goes above and beyond high-speed rail, and how do we make those prudent long-term investments in the corridor. Travel times were kind of one of those key things that kept coming up both for us and for Caltrain in that conversation. At our open houses, there was similarly lots of support for the preferred alternative, and sort of desire for us to move forward with both Valley to Valley and Phase 1 service as soon as possible. That came out really clearly that people were excited about the system, the mobility that it would offer, and wanted to see it happen, and sort of saw the benefits that it would give compared to other modes of travel. And then the kind of last thing to mention out of the city, county, and our other engagements, we definitely heard from the passing track cities that they appreciated the reduced impacts, as I mentioned previously, but we also heard of concerns in both Millbrae and in Brisbane around the potential impacts on proposed development in those two locations that we'll need to continue to coordinate with those communities on. In this project section, the timeline looks very similar. It's a little bit behind San Jose to Merced. We actually moved up the milestone of identifying the preferred alternative so that we could bring both of these together in one meeting as we're doing today. But we do have a little bit more work to do to get the draft environmental document out, and then coming back similarly in the spring of 2021 for your final certification of the EIR-EIS. So with that, our request is for the board to concur with staff's recommendation for alternative A as the preferred alternative in the draft EIR-EIS.
Okay. Thank you very much, Boris. Appreciate the summary and the work on that. So we'll now go to public comment, and then we'll call you back up for questions or comments from the board. So we have 7 comments, and I'm going to ask the first 4 to go ahead and line up. Jerry Brazel from San Mateo, Doug Johnson from San Francisco, Stuart Schillinger from Brisbane, and Greg Greenway from Redwood City. Mr. Brazel.
Thank you, and welcome to the new board members and all that. First time I talked to the board, I think Quentin Kopp was on the board, and way back then, even with the timeline, we were talking about 4 tracks all the way from San Jose to San Francisco. I'm in favor of 4 tracks, but once they went to the blended rail system, we're lucky we have 2 tracks yet and all that. But going back 50 years ago, when I was in the Army, I had the chance to ride high-speed rail in Japan. They had just opened up the Japanese Bullet. In the past 50 years, high-speed rail has been built all around the world. I've ridden high-speed rail in Europe. I've ridden high-speed rail in China. In fact, in China, in the past 10 years, they've built 15,000 miles of high-speed rail, an average of 1,500 miles a year. We're still working on our first 150 miles. But this is in reference to item 4. In all the high-speed rail systems in the world, they all have passing tracks. Now, I realize you're working with a blended system, but I'm in favor of passing tracks. I live in San Mateo, right near where the passing tracks will go, so I'm a resident there. I'm in favor of it, and I'm in favor of high-speed rail, and I hope we can work it out. It's on my bucket list to ride high-speed rail in this country, and please get moving faster on all this. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson.
Love a good bucket list. Doug Johnson. I'm with the City of San Francisco, the Planning Department. I am the Transportation Planning Manager. You should all be in receipt of Mayor Breed's letter to you all, indicating its very clear, strong support from the city for high-speed rail and for Alternative A. High-speed rail will provide safe and sustainable alternative to San Francisco, the region, and the state for its visitors, all of our residents, students, and workers. Within the region, it is critical that both higher levels of electrified Caltrain service and high-speed rail are available and delivered as soon as feasible. We all know our freeways are crowded, travel options are few. Airport and freeway expansions would impose massive environmental and direct costs to accommodate the state's long-term mobility needs. We look forward to ongoing cooperation with your team on this alternative and the broader program. The city is confident that there are solutions to challenges identified and discussed here today. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Schillinger.
Good afternoon. My name is Stuart Schillinger. I am the Deputy City Manager for the City of Brisbane. On behalf of the city, I would like to thank the Chair and the other members of the board for this opportunity to submit my testimony in opposition to the California High-Speed Rail Authority's identification of the Brisbane Bayland site as the only location for placement of a high-speed rail light maintenance facility along the San Francisco to San Jose project section. The city appreciates that there is not enough time to address all of our concerns today, and therefore we respectfully request that the board include my prepared remarks and accompanying materials on behalf of the city in the record for this hearing. In July 18, 2019, public presentation to the Brisbane City Council, the authority's representatives stunned the residents of Brisbane when they identified the Brisbane Baylands, a single parcel of land, as both the first and second preferred alternative for a location of a light maintenance facility along the San Francisco-San Jose project section. Let me repeat that. Authority staff is recommending that the board identify the Brisbane Baylands as the only location the authority should actively consider replacement of its planned section maintenance facility between San Jose and San Francisco. This board's acceptance of that recommendation would be an abuse of discretion for the reasons detailed in the city's comment letter to the authority of August 21st, 2019, which letter I incorporate in my testimony today. First, it is clear that the authority staff has not performed reasonable due diligence on the Baylands and does not understand the practical difficulties, hazards, and costs associated with the development of a maintenance facility on the site. Without evaluating these challenges and those associated with other potential alternatives, the authority cannot make the determination that other sites are not practicable by comparison. Second, the proposed preference cannot be accepted or endorsed by this board because it is fundamentally inconsistent with duly adopted local and regional planning goals and plans, including the Planned Bay Area and Regional Transportation, Planned Sustainable Community Strategies that were developed and adopted to ensure land use in the area is consistent with the state's climate and sustainability goals. I have more to say, but I will just submit that.
Okay, thank you, and we do have your comments, and we'll incorporate them in the record. Thank you. Mr. Greenway. And then while Mr. Greenway is coming up, can I call the other public comments that I have? Mr. Roberts, Ms. Levin, and Roland. Please.
Good afternoon. The Peninsula Freight Rail Users Group is a coalition of the freight rail shippers on the Caltrain corridor. We want the high-speed rail project to succeed, and we think that the staff recommendation is a sensible way to move the project forward. It'll lead to more substantive and detailed conversations going forward. Like most stakeholders, our support is not entirely unconditional. From the freight shipper's standpoint, the main consideration is that the high-speed rail project does not impede the ability to ship cargo on the Caltrain corridor. We think that this decision before you today does not have negative impacts, and based on our experience, we're very confident that going forward, we will continue to have conversations with the authority and staff. Of course, there's trade-offs between alternatives A and B, and Boris laid out the analysis that goes into the staff recommendation. We think that analysis is sound, and I'd add a couple of considerations that give me confidence in particular. One is the public outreach has been outstanding. I want to commend Boris and Morgan Galley and the outreach team. I participate on one of the community working groups and am involved in lots of other ways with staff outreach efforts. And I can say that I believe that they sincerely listen and that public input is incorporated into the recommendations. The other thing that gives me confidence is the alignment with the Caltrain business plan. That's incredibly important to people in San Mateo County. Alternative A is consistent with the Caltrain modernization project as it's environmentally cleared. Alternative B does have passing tracks, but presumably if Caltrain is going to double or triple its capacity over the next, by 2040, there's going to be a whole nother conversation about passing tracks, much more comprehensive beyond the middle four in Alternative B. And so for those reasons, I would encourage you to support the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Mr. Roberts.
Good afternoon. Steve Roberts from the Rail Passenger Association of California. Thank you for giving me the opportunity for remarks. Our association is in favor of the recommended Alternative A for between San Francisco and San Jose. And we also think that this initiative, along with working with Caltrain's 2040 initiative, provides an opportunity to jointly move forward in fully utilizing the unique and valuable asset that the Caltrain corridor is. And I look forward to working with everyone in fully maximizing the value of that asset in our urban area. Thank you.
Thank you. And I thank you, Ms. Levin. While you're coming up, I realized that there were a couple of other comments that were clipped together that I did not see. So, but if Ms., I don't know if Ms. Ledbetter and Horan could come up and speak after Roland, that would be great. So please go ahead, Ms. Levin.
Okay, Deanna Levin with Friends of Caltrain, and I do want to add that we have about 8,000 participants on the Peninsula Corridor from San Francisco through San Jose, supporting, as an organization, we support the blended system and have been really encouraging the Caltrain business plan. And regarding that, wanted to talk about that and the compatibility with the alternative with no passing tracks. So what high-speed rail has studied is compatible with what Caltrain studied back in 2013, 2014 for the basic electrification. However, as that analysis has been superseded by Caltrain's analysis for the business plan. Caltrain's business plan analysis indicates the opportunity to increase ridership by 3 to 4 times and replacing 5.5 freeway lanes that are not going to need to be built with that, addressing that pent-up demand. But to address that pent-up demand based on the new analysis in the Caltrain business plan that the board is about to set direction for in October, that does require passing tracks. And the main goal there is not about speed, as Mr. Lipkin said. It is about frequency, being able to get more frequent service, and it is also about schedule quality. The lack of passing tracks would change from being able to have a regular clock face schedule every 10 or 15 minutes to having bunched trains every 2 or 3 minutes and then another one 20 minutes from then. That would preclude making good connections to local and regional service, and it would greatly decrease the appeal of the service to riders and suppress ridership. So I would urge you to, as with the DISC, acknowledge that this analysis has been superseded and commit to working with Caltrain to update the analysis in the future to accommodate Caltrain's current business plan, as opposed to going on a 5-year-old obsolete information. Thank you.
Sorry, Niall Ledbetter.
Good afternoon. My name is Niall Ledbetter, and I am the Airport Intermodal Planner for San Francisco International Airport. I'm here today on behalf of SF4 Airport to congratulate the California High-Speed Rail Commission for identifying a staff-recommended alternative that brings high-speed rail to the peninsula, and to reiterate the importance of Millbrae Intermodal Station for peninsula operations when planning for high-speed rail's future. For the airport, the seamless interconnectivity of the station between all its transit options, including future high-speed rail, is integral for the station's success. As major European hub airports such as Frankfurt and Amsterdam do, there is great opportunity for connecting directly plane and train, where airlines place code shares on high-speed trains and revenue sharing occurs to allow for point-to-point trips utilizing both modes. A resident of Fresno, therefore, could travel to Denver, New York, or even Tokyo on one ticketed itinerary. This can only occur if the transfer at Millbrae is intuitive and as convenient as transferring between terminals within an airport. The frequency of both high-speed rail and its connecting mode between the station and the airport terminals will play key roles in this connectivity. As SFO continues to get closer to its maximum yearly capacity of 71 million passengers, offloading interstate air traffic to rail is the sustainable option for the airport to maximize its operations as it looks to the future. San Francisco International Airport would like to thank the California High-Speed Rail Commission and its board members for its continued push for connecting the Peninsula and Bay Area's residents and jobs to Greater California and also beyond to the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Horn?
Thank you, board members, for allowing me to speak before you. My name is Deb Horn. I'm a Brisbane citizen, member of the High-Speed Rail Citizens Committee and member of the Brisbane Citizens for Responsible Development. We did not have community outreach in Brisbane. We had one brief City Hall meeting that was not publicized. So because of that, I'd like to respectfully request 4 minutes. I can read this really quickly in 4 minutes.
Go ahead.
Yes? Thank you. Before I present my evidence on why choosing alternative A for the rail yard in Brisbane is a grave mistake, let me briefly remind you that there's a long history of Brisbane residents supporting high-speed rail on alternative B on the west side. There was even a national renewable energy laboratory study done that looked at co-locating solar panels with high-speed rail with the rail yard, connected on the nearby PG&E substation to supply substantial renewable energy for the region. Our EIR identified this alternative plan as the most environmentally and economically feasible development plan for the Brisbane Baylands. Choosing preference A, the east side of the Brisbane Baylands, is another example of mismanagement of land acquisition, detailed yesterday at the LA Times as the high-speed rail's biggest problem. Why is this true? First, high-speed rail used an incomplete EIR that had major data gaps to draw their conclusions. Most of the unregulated hazardous material in the former dump are unknown. What is known is that the site is rife with lead, arsenic, heavy metals, and likely has radiated soil from the former Navy Yard at Hunters Point. Second, heaped on top of the dump since its closure in 1967 is approximately 70 feet of additional soil and hazardous materials from UPC's profitable soils processing business. From 1990 to 2009, the UPC's soils business accepted unregulated waste from construction sites, including excavation from the subway station. 19 years of that 70-foot mountain of dirt piled additional unknown, untested hazardous waste at the alternative A site. Third, the calculations of the high-speed rail staff for the required elevation level of the rails will require digging below this additional 70 feet and then digging into the dump to a depth that not only will put lives in harm's way, but will be underwater for conservative projections of sea rise. Remember, the dump was not an engineered or even diked bay landfill. Remove the fill and the bay will pour back in, helped over seawalls by the severe storms that are becoming commonplace across the globe. Fourth and finally, people who don't live in Brisbane like to say the prevailing winds in Brisbane are from the west. I live in Brisbane. When it gets windy, the winds come from every direction. And surely we know of the powerful easterly winds that whip up and cause fires across our state. Moving the soil to the depths you need for your rail yard so close to the town of Brisbane will cause public health hazards that no moral person would attempt. No matter how you try to mitigate this, arsenic, lead, and unknown hazardous substances will be dispersed in the town upon the people of Brisbane. Why would you put people's health and safety at risk when there's already a rail yard at the required elevation on the west side that is unlikely to be impacted by sea level rise and climate change. The site has a smaller footprint and would allow more housing. The west side alternative B does not displace housing, since housing has not been built. Do I get my 2 more?
Yes,
Thank you.
please get it in.
Let's see, housing has not been built. In fact, no specific plan or development agreement for this site has been submitted. No zoning changes have been made. Since SB 262 failed in the state legislature, the state can now increase the housing numbers. The location of this housing will likely migrate from the planned location. Nothing is set in stone. No agreements have been signed. As one of your consultants said in a public meeting, Measure JJ, passed by the citizens of Brisbane narrowly, is merely an intention. The state can impose what it wishes on Brisbane. Since SB 262 failed, the timeline now allows for a thoughtful integration of high-speed rail and housing. Regarding the impacts on the wetlands, there will be the same outcome should you choose alternative A or B. There are no protected silver spot butterflies on the Baylands. There's one creek that goes across side A and side B, and it goes to the bay. And regardless of which side is chosen, a culvert needs to be built. And so alternative A or B, as far as environmental impacts, is equal with both alternatives. And finally, it's a false equivalence to combine the site at Brisbane with the entire corridor and choosing alternatives. Because of the toxicity of the Brisbane site, the criteria are not the same. Sorely missing in your criteria for Brisbane is public health and safety, which may make alternative A in Brisbane cost prohibitive in terms of negative impacts. What price do you put on human lives? In conclusion, I'd like to ask you to consider alternative B for Brisbane for the facts I have mentioned and the many other substantive reasons that my time limit here today does not allow me to present. Thank you so much for the extra time.
Thank you, Ms. Horn. Roland.
Thank you. So I'm trying to go very quickly through all the hotspots you just heard about in the last 20 minutes or so. Millbrae passing tracks. You do not need passing tracks in Millbrae for the same reason that you do not need passing tracks at Fullerton, which is between LA and Anaheim. There's actually a memo on the authority's website that explains why not. If every train stops, why are you having passing tracks? Now, we do need passing stations in the peninsula, and we're going to have lots of them. And it's one of them that's completely missing from alternative A, which is called Redwood Junction, which is a connection to the Barton Rail. And I suggest you model it after the Ebbsfleet station, which is in a high-speed line between London and Channel Tunnel. Now, Brisbane. Why do we need this massive 100-acre, 27-track facility when Deutsche Bahn submitted a report to the legislature on May the 1st saying that they plan to operate 8 trains, 2 of which are spare? Why do you need 27 tracks? Location. I suggest that you look at the Javelin facility in Ashford, again on the high-speed line with the London Channel Tunnel. Ashford is the equivalent of Gilroy. How can they maintain 29 trains with 8 tracks? Now, in closing, I would like to voice support for alternative A, but I would like you to consider a single EIR consolidated between San Francisco and Gilroy. And then, at a later date, let's start talking about another EIR between Gilroy and Fresno, and preferably that will use an alignment that's going to eliminate all the wetlands issue that you had profusely in the previous item. Thank you.
Thank you, Roland. And we do have one more, I believe, Drew. Is that?
Good afternoon, members of the board. I wasn't going to speak, but I keep looking at this picture up there, and I keep thinking I need to say something about that. That location is within minutes of where I live. And why I want to convey is I am generally for high-speed rail. I'm actually also generally for the passing I understand why that's not being recommended here because of the cost, so to speak. I get the math from an engineering perspective, but I can tell you that location with that rendering is more beautiful than what we currently have in that area. We have a narrow strip, there's car lots in that area, and there's just parked cars. There are some little businesses like a little yogurt shop and some things, but this is not, passing tracks by definition seem everyone, oh, we don't want passing tracks to be terrible. In this area, passing tracks isn't a terrible thing. I mean, the land through a lot of this is open. It's parking lots in the city of Belmont and stuff. So it's not like 1,000 residents are going to be wiped out while doing passing tracks or something. So it's kind of just I wanted to convey the openness that from a long-term perspective, passing tracks are needed for a variety of reasons. I understand maybe technically it's not for this purpose, but passing tracks in this area are not all bad. It's set up possibly to do it versus other areas and stuff. So, with mitigation, maybe adding a bike ped path for miles along the route, that adds something back to the neighborhoods and stuff. And it's okay. It's a trade. We all have to make trades here, And I literally, that's minutes from where I live and stuff. So, anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Drew. So with that, I have no more public comments on this section. And Boris, if you could come back up and open it up for questions or comments from the board. Anyone have any questions or comments for Boris? Henry.
Real quickly, just wanted, based on comments from a lot of the folks, a lot of compliments to you and your staff. It's like you've done some really great work out there. And also here in the critical path, I'd like to meet with you more just to talk more about the path to get it done.
Sure, happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. I just had a question just with regards to the package, Boris, for this item, which the document which starts briefing September 17, 2019. There's no numbers on these pages, but it would be, I think, the 8th page back. It's where it says budget and physical impact. Maybe I've got one that's not the most recent, but then it says budget review here, but it's not put in. Below it, right below it, it says reviewer information and signature.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now, and I know we had some budget language from. Yeah. Looking at this or this? I think it's this.
There is a different one. I'm looking at this. Yeah, that's what yeah, it's not.
I think this might have been the budget.
Because there's one in the previous one also, but it has the estimated capital.
Yeah, that's right here.
Oh, it does.
So
Okay.
the numbers are. Right, that's basically like the chart. Right, numbers are here. Right. And then in your San Jose to Merced item, you had written some stuff, if you remember. Yeah. Yeah, so I think, thank you, Vice Chair, for pointing that out. The language that should go there is language that's similar to San Jose to Merced that reflects what's in the chart that's on the previous page that shows the cost differential and confirms that that's consistent with the business plan estimates.
Okay.
It looks like it got left out of the memo, and I apologize for that oversight. I don't know if, Brian, you want to add anything else from... what
Okay,
you
so
had?
it's just going to be reflective of what's on the previous page?
Correct. There's the table on the previous page that has the cost difference between the two alternatives.
Yeah.
And then what was intended to be there is very similar language to what we had in San Jose to Merced that just reaffirms that it's consistent with our, or based on those numbers, it's consistent with our business plan estimates beforehand. And again, I apologize that this got left out of the board memo.
And is it also based on 2017 numbers?
Correct.
And can I just ask a quick question? Why are we using I meant to ask that before, 2017 numbers instead of 2019 numbers?
So for consistency with both the business plan, not what year of expenditure dollar, but constant year dollar estimates that were presented there, as well as when we took action in 2018 on the Southern California preferred alternatives, we simply maintained that through for Northern California because that's the previous thing that had come.
Okay.
Of course, those will be updated as we do the 2020 business plan, and so things going forward will.
So it's just consistent with previous practice?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? If not, we'll accept the motion. And again, we're going to do this in two parts. The first one will be the sequel one, Resolution 1907. And Ernie just moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Any
Second.
other further comments? Call the roll, please.
Director Schenk,
Yes.
Vice Chair Richards,
Yes.
Director Curtin, Director Lowenthal,
She had to leave.
She had to.
Director Camacho,
Yes.
Director Miller,
Yes.
Chairman Donza,
Yes.
Director Perea.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you. Now to motion 1908, Resolution 1908. It's just the NEPA. Accept.
So moved.
Moves there a
Second.
Second.
Okay. Any other comments? Call the roll, please.
Director Schenk,
Yes.
Vice Chair Richards,
Yes.
Director Curtin. Yes. Director Camacho,
Yes.
Director Miller,
Yes.
Chairman Donza,
Yes.
Director Perea.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. So that was the last item on the agenda. I'd just like to make a couple closing remarks. First of all, I'd like to thank Boris and your team once again for all of the heavy lifting going to this, and recognize that there will be much more heavy lifting subsequent to this, so appreciate your leadership. And since everyone knows where you live, I'm sure they'll hear from you. You will hear from them. Secondly, in all seriousness, just like to again thank the public and all of those who commented. As in the item number 3 on item number 4, this is the beginning, not the end of the process. I know there's a fair amount of sensitivity in Brisbane in particular to these alternatives, and we'll make sure that we're engaged in that conversation, and we'll take very seriously all of the comments that were made here and submitted into the record. So with that, there is no need for a executive session, so we will declare, unless there's any other items, we'll declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Len. That's really good. And I will circle back.